The tail opened with a soft glow piercing the shadows. The main character, slowly opening his eyes, noticed a flickering bonfire. Observing the joyful girls near the flames, he figured they were celebrating. His eyes widened. A grin spread across his face as he thought to himself that he hadn't realized he was still a hit with the ladies. Chen Li shifted his gaze to the roasting meat over the fire. The aroma of grilled lamb prompted him to stand. His lips curved into a broad smile. Rising, Chen Li glanced at the group by the bonfire once more. The grin remained fixed on his face. He was thrilled by the sight of lovely girls and savory food. Moments later, he dashed toward the gathering, but promptly collapsed to the ground. He scowled at himself. Chen Li, twitching his hand, discovered he was bound. He lifted his head. A system window materialized before him, notifying him that he had 1 minute remaining until the survival quest concluded. Suddenly, 2 men approached. The protagonist furrowed his brow, confused about where the charming girls had vanished. Kneeling, he told the men there must be some error and that he didn't belong here. The hunters merely laughed, muttering in their unfamiliar tongue. The protagonist clenched his jaw. Now he recalled his location. At that instant, a massive bird soared over the clearing. 12 hours earlier, Chen Li had found himself on the coast of untamed lands. He coughed while standing at the water's edge. He scooped up some water and splashed his face. Examining his hands, he pondered how he ended up here, as he had just been accompanying a young woman. They had been shopping for her jewelry. Looking away, he wondered if this was divine retribution for his playboy ways. Chen Li shivered, hearing a sudden scream. Turning, he saw half-naked men and decided this must be a prank. A small boy grabbed a bone and yelled something. He hurled the bone sharply. It whizzed a millimeter past Chile's face. Blood spurted from a wound moments later. He bolted from the natives, remarking that they shouldn't take it so seriously. Chen Li smirked, boasting that he was still swift on his feet. Ordinary folks couldn't keep up with him, let alone the boy among them. The boy froze, realizing something. The protagonist gritted his teeth as another bone grazed his side. Frowning, the boy declared this was no jest, it was real. Abruptly, a system window appeared before him, announcing the start of the main quest: survival. Still running, the protagonist tried to decipher what this main quest entailed. A man swung a bone spear, aiming for Chen Li. Moments later, he launched it. The spear's tip hurtled toward the boy's back. Unaware, the boy kept running. Glancing back, he shrieked in terror. The blunt end of the bone struck his neck. His eyes rolled back. He thought he was done for. His pupils shrank and then vanished entirely. And so, Chen Li found himself bound by the fire. He sat quietly, staring at the system panel reporting the task's completion. The protagonist chuckled. He still had a shot after miraculously surviving 12 hours. As the men stepped away, the boy asked the system about his reward. Multiple system windows with various details popped up before him. He frowned as the system offered to unlock the beginner's gift pack. Moments later, a system card appeared, announcing the acquisition of basic language skills, a beginner's survival guide, and an axe. Information flooded his mind like data cubes. Chen Li's eyes widened. He began to comprehend the natives' chatter around the fire. He realized this was an ancient world, where culture was yet to form, and everything was in its infancy. Chen Li's mission was to survive and build a civilization in this new realm. All he needed was a suit to fully dive into this open-world strategy game. Frowning, he allocated points to his strength. Instantly, a battle axe materialized in his hand. The ropes binding him began to snap. A moment later, he ripped them to pieces. Grinning and tightening his grip, Chen Li remarked that he hadn't anticipated a single point boosting his strength so much. The two men stood still, staring at the protagonist. He slung the axe over his shoulder, a smile spreading across his face. Shiru, enraged, charged toward the young man, commanding his followers to slay him immediately. The protagonist remained unfazed as the two men closed in. He merely smirked. Holding the axe before him, he declared that these ignorant barbarians dared to challenge him, a god. Shugu clutched the bone weapon with both hands, admitting he didn't grasp what a god was. Chen Li grinned and explained that it meant he was a supreme authority among these primitive people, their leader, sent by the heavens to rule them. Shu's body shook with fury. Abruptly, he leaped forward, swinging his weapon. The protagonist, caught off guard, clenched his jaw and frowned. Chen Li swung his axe, insisting he couldn't lose. He managed to block the bone weapon. The earth beneath him buckled. A second later, the ground split, cracks spiderwebbing outward. The protagonist scowled, admitting he hadn't expected such strength from this savage. Shiru and Chen Li faced off, tension crackling between them. Shu gritted his teeth as the axe bit into his bone weapon. The protagonist's brow furrowed. Shu let out a tense scream. Moments later, his bone weapon snapped. A fragment of bone flew off. Both the protagonist and the man stared at it. Shiru, stunned, gaped at the broken bone. The tribesman looked on in shock and disbelief. Chen Li, turning his head, sensed something ominous was coming. Shiru, seething with rage, roared, demanding how Chen Li dared destroy his weapon. Veins bulged on his face as he ordered the entire tribe to attack the protagonist. The young man fled, shouting that this was a total sham since they'd agreed to a one-on-one fight. Chen Li ran, yelling that it was absurd for so many to gang up on a 24-year-old. One savage approached, swinging his club. The protagonist struck first with his axe, and the savage collapsed in terror. Chen Li stood over him, declaring they were nothing but savages. Clenching his fist, he said he didn't want to fight them, but they'd forced his hand. Frowning, he demanded their surrender. The crowd of tribesmen froze, motionless. The protagonist narrowed his eyes, thinking to himself that if these savages hadn't attacked, he wouldn't be in this mess. Suddenly, the tribesmen quaked with fear. They spun around and fled. Unaware of someone behind him, the protagonist tried to figure out what sparked their panic. Abruptly, a system window popped up before him, assigning a quest to exercise a saber-tooth tiger. The tiger's drool dripped onto the boy's head. Chen Li, startled, jerked his head up to face the beast and bolted, screaming. The tiger raised its paw and roared. Junie parried the beast's claws with his axe while running. Dodging its swipes, he questioned why everything wanted to devour him. The protagonist leaped downward. Glancing back, he muttered that at this rate, he'd die. Gritting his teeth as the tiger landed behind him, he thought this mission was ludicrous. The beast could kill him in one bite. The tiger lunged forward. Its claws raked across the boy's back. Chen Li collapsed in agony. Clenching his teeth, he struggled to rise. Swinging his axe, he declared he could no longer flee. Gripping the axe with both hands, he realized going head-on was futile. He had to outwit the beast. Frowning, he racked his brain for something to use against the saber-toothed tiger. Spotting smoke from a fire in the distance, he had an idea. As the beast raised its paw, Chen Li knew he had one shot. He suddenly charged forward. The tiger, surprised, reared up on its hind legs. A moment later, it pounced toward the boy. The protagonist slid across the ground. The tiger simply dropped its paws, landing on him. Fleeing, Chen Li cursed, vowing never to trust movie stunts again. Scowling, he muttered that all cats were vile for toying with their prey. Racing toward the forest, he said the plants ahead would aid him. If he reached the fire, he'd triumph. The tiger swiped, shattering a tree in its path. Its claws nearly grazed the boy's head, missing by inches. Chen Li gritted his teeth, pushing forward. He squinted, spotting his gola fire blazing in the clearing. With his last burst of strength, he leaped forward. His body tumbled. Soon, he rose, finding himself beside the fire. He seized a burning branch. The young man hoisted a makeshift torch and swung it at the tiger. Startled by the flames, the beast let out a fierce roar. It quickly backed away. Squinting one eye, the tiger snarled. The creature's face contorted in fear. The hero, circling the fire, taunted the tiger to come closer if it was brave enough. Chen Li gripped the torch tightly in front of him. His brow furrowed deeper as he caught an odd noise. The sound echoed from the nearby forest. The boy lifted his gaze, recognizing the source of the noise. A massive paw print from the beast was etched into the ground. The tiger's jaw dropped in shock, hearing the sound of approaching steps. As if jolted by a spark, the cat spun around and bolted. Chen Li, clenching his teeth, shouted at the tiger not to flee, as he had issued a challenge and didn't want to be left alone. Moments later, the system notified him of the mission's success in repelling the tiger. Spotting 2 new points, the hero's mouth fell open in astonishment. He whipped his head around, catching another sound from the forest. Facing the noise, he muttered that someone was nearing, and he needed to escape fast. Breaking into a sprint, he instructed the system to allocate 1 point each to strength and agility. For a brief moment, multiple system windows flashed before the boy. A second later, his breath steamed in the air. Chen Li kept running, refusing to stop. He leaped and landed on the ground. Below, he spotted a group of savages gathered. Frowning, he called out to them. Sugu stood and, in shock, asked the boy how he hadn't been devoured by the saber-toothed tiger. The hero smirked. Brandishing his axe, he declared that the puny tiger was merely a large cat to him. The moment he struck, it fled immediately. The hero grinned broadly. He glanced at the crowd, puzzled, trying to figure out why they weren't intimidated by him. Perhaps he'd said something off. Suddenly, a girl balled her fists. As she pressed close to him, the boy asked what she was up to. She abruptly grabbed his leg, proclaiming that he had saved them all. The tribe members raised their hands, thanking the boy and urging him to become their leader. Chen Li's brow creased. He realized this was the quest's reward. Looking at the joyful crowd, he remarked that he hadn't anticipated such affection. He chuckled, telling them to rise first, as their warm welcome made it impossible to disappoint them. Clenching his fist, Sharu shouted that he was truly the mightiest man. For the first time, Chen Li felt like an emperor. He raised his axe and commanded everyone to stand. Then he proclaimed himself king. At that instant, system windows popped up, confirming his successful integration into the nameless tribe. Closing his eyes, the young man assigned a point to physical strength. Opening his eyes, he noted that every boost in abilities leads to significant growth. The more points he invests, the simpler tasks become as his gear and power improve. A vast inventory panel materialized before him. Among the items was a healing potion. Spotting it, the hero read its storage and usage requirements. Placing a hand on his chest, he said that if he takes it out, he must use it within a day or discard it. Soon, A liquid orb appeared in his hand. The fluid surged toward the wounds on his back. Moments later, the injuries vanished. Chen Li grinned, calling it a remarkable item. Extending his hand to Shu, he offered that if anyone was hurt, he could provide this medicine. The man clasped his hands and exclaimed that their king was incredibly powerful. Closing his eyes, the boy stated that this was how he could safeguard them. Soon, his eyes opened, and he declared that as their king, he needed to learn more about them. Pointing at the man, he ordered him to introduce himself and share his skills. Shu beamed, explaining that before the boy arrived, he was the tribe's leader and their finest warrior. The young man with rugged skin lifted his hands and announced his name as An. He boasted of his skill in hunting. The bronzed man gestured broadly and declared his name was Wolf Claw, claiming he could bellow fiercely, startling away beasts. The bald, towering figure grinned and said his name was Huang, proclaiming himself the mightiest. Just then, a hand rested on his shoulder. A girl stood beside him, asserting she was the strongest. She fixed her gaze on the stunned protagonist, fists clenched. Shanying presented herself. The protagonist squinted, suspecting she was the secret mastermind of this challenge. Another girl approached holding an apple and introduced herself as Shu. Chen Li chuckled, noting she seemed ordinary. Suddenly, someone bumped into the back of his head. The protagonist spun around, annoyed. All smiled, apologized, and introduced herself, pointing to the children nearby and mentioning she hadn't named them yet. Chen Li grinned broadly. He wondered silently how he differed from the rogue, Chao. A boy appeared abruptly, startling the protagonist. Xiong, hands on hips, admitted he lacked special talents but possessed keen eyesight and hearing, ideal for finding paths. The protagonist stroked his chin, thinking this Xiong might prove valuable as a scout later. Lowering his hand, he said they could address him as king, leader, or brother Chen Li. Observing the group closely, he declared he knew all about civilization and had come to share his wisdom. The tribespeople stared at the youth before them, astonished. Chen Li, smiling, promised to teach them much, assuring daily meet. The crowd froze, shocked by his words, then raised their hands in celebration. At that moment, a system panel appeared, announcing the main quest's activation. The protagonist's eyes widened as he read the quest details. Placing a hand on his chest, he muttered about another primary mission. He surveyed the group 15 in total. Narrowing his eyes, he noted the need to grow the tribe to 50 within 18 days. As the group cheered, he looked over them, pondering how to merge other tribes. Glancing up, Chen Li realized these 18 days would be far from joyful. He'd need to exert maximum effort as time slipped away. Staring at the system window, he remarked that a grand chest and legacy were substantial rewards. The moon glowed brightly over the mountain valley. The protagonist lay on the ground, eyes closed, attempting sleep. Soon he stood, grumbling that the grass irritated his skin. Rising, he declared he couldn't conquer the world hungry. Observing the sleeping tribespeople, he noted their simplicity, not even posting a guard. The weary youth pondered where to find food. His eyes widened suddenly. He recalled heaps of roasted meat by the fire. As his inner angel and demon debated, he weighed the idea himself. Clapping his hands, he decided he wouldn't encounter that beast. Chen Li reached out, gripping an axe, and moved forward, frowning as he navigated the forest. The radiant moon lit his way. Bushes stirred nearby. The protagonist glanced up, noting the eerie silence. In a clearing ahead, a fire burned. Chen Li neared it, surprised to find leftover prey. Examining the fur and roasted meat, he remarked that, as leader, he couldn't think only of himself. He grabbed a rope, tied up the rabbit's remains, and, lifting the bundle, smiled, saying he'd bring it to the group. Carrying the meat, he dashed off. En route, odd noises halted him. The terrain felt altered. His axe slipped from his grip. Chen Li tumbled into a pit. Opening his eyes, he frowned, inspecting the hole and questioning who dug it. Noticing his shadow, he puzzled over how moonlight pierced the dense jungle. He glanced aside, then upward. Placing a hand on a massive pawprint's edge, he stood, stunned. Surrounding trees were toppled. Gazing at enormous footprints, he muttered that no creature could be so vast. Frowning, he imagined a dinosaur. Retrieving his axe and meat, he called himself a fool, realizing he'd just seen signs of a saber-tooth tiger. Scanning around, he noted this wasn't merely an age of wild beasts, mammoths and dinosaurs roamed here. Climbing from the pit, he vowed to find a safe haven and settle swiftly. As dawn broke, tribesmen eagerly seized the meat. The protagonist watched, shocked, as they devoured the rabbit. Raising his hands, he shouted for them to stop bickering. As they stood before him, Junie silently noted their ignorance of fire-making, manners, and resource management. With a grin, he declared that today's meal would be for those who joined him on the hunt first. Shu beamed, explaining that they typically took turns hunting. Gesturing toward Huang and Ayin, he noted that it was their turn yesterday. Today, it was Lu Tang, Jutiao, and Wolfbone's chance. The man tightened his fists, stating that everyone wanted to hunt since the king was among them. The group of men nodded, affirming Shiru's words with smiles. The protagonist quietly observed Xiong. Noticing the boy's tight grip on his weapon, he assumed Xiong was cautious, perhaps believing the protagonist held a grudge. Raising his hands, the protagonist announced that he wanted to select a location for the entire family to establish a new home. The girls approached and inquired about the meaning of family. The boy explained that it was when she and her loved ones shared a single home. Placing his hand on a tree, he likened a family to the tree's roots, which dig deep into the earth, ensuring food and safety for all. Overhearing the king's words, Shanling embraced her friend. She then extended her arms toward the boy. Holding Chun close, she asked if she could live with the king. Stepping back, he replied that they were all family and would live together. Shanling lifted her hands, exclaiming that the king wished to live with her and even wanted to have a child with her. The protagonist, standing behind her, told her not to invent non-existent rules. Suddenly, the boy turned when Shugu asked where he planned to build the new house. Smiling, the boy beckoned everyone closer. Crouching, he began sketching on the ground. After drawing a circle, he explained that they'd need a large, flat piece of land first. Narrowing his eyes, he added that an ideal spot would have mountains to the north and a river to the south. Once the map was complete, he noted that this setup would simplify access to water, field irrigation, firewood, and minerals while creating a secure, enclosed area. Pointing to another section of the map, he mentioned that a forest across the river would be perfect for hunting and gathering. The tribe members gazed at the map, puzzled, as the protagonist clarified details. In his mind, the protagonist already pictured himself on a ship, plotting further plans. Ixiong approached the boy, saying he knew the place described. Chen Li, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders, promised that if such a place was found, he'd become the first minister. Picturing bulls, Xiong cautioned that this place lay far to the east, and was home to a herd of bulls best left undisturbed. Imagining a typical bull, the protagonist remarked that this was even better, as the herd would supply plenty of quality meat. Rubbing his fist, he declared that today's prey was a herd of calves. A broad grin spread across the protagonist's face as he raised his axe, urging them to grab their weapons and head toward their new home. The scene shifts to another part of the mountain range, where a vast forest filled the landscape. A chicken's lifeless head emerged from the bushes. Xiong lifted his head, noting that the area was peaceful and quiet, suggesting they could move forward after a short wait. The protagonist grinned, assuring him there was no need for such caution. As they exited the forest, the boy added that they shouldn't worry, as scaring off a tiger would surely protect them. Xiong paused, pointing out that from a nearby peak, they could see the bull's gathering spot. The group climbed toward the hilltop. Xiong dropped to the ground, urging the others to follow suit. Chen Li protested, telling them not to be overly cautious. Soon he peeked out, and his eyes widened in astonishment. Before him stretched a vast plain. Smiling, he remarked that he could smell the sea. A system window appeared when he requested the map. Studying the system map, the boy declared this location ideal for building their first city. Suddenly, Xiong tugged at the boy's arm. Flailing his arms, the boy warned him not to speak so loudly, lest the black bulls overhear. Without arguing, Chen Li peered from behind cover. System window reflections flickered in his eyes. Using the system, he examined the area's plants. Spotting liana, he learned it was poisonous. Next, he analyzed a tree, noticing a gray squirrel on a branch, its meat tender. Finally, he studied a wasp, discovering its bite was toxic, with 5 bites proving fatal. The protagonist's brow furrowed. Gazing at Xiong, he inquired about the whereabouts of those massive black bulls. Shang, poking his head out, replied that they were just beyond that cluster of trees. Ahead lay a wide curve in the river. So, the group, guided by Xiong, moved toward the bulls. 30 minutes later, the sun hit its zenith. The protagonist's party neared the grove. As they stepped inside, Xiong remarked that they'd probably be spotted soon. Chen Li, hearing this, furrowed his brow. It was eerily silent here. Crouching low, he tried to discern what was so unsettling about the bulls. The boy scanned the foliage ahead. He let out a soft laugh, realizing the plants were nothing unusual. Standing by the bushes, he noted his concern that something more frightening might lurk, as not even a single calf was in sight. Suddenly, sweat beaded on the boy's forehead, and he pointed ahead. The protagonist froze at the sight. Looking where Sung indicated, he said the tree appeared to be shifting. Shung's jaw dropped, stunned by the creature's towering height. Chen Li, grasping the situation, clenched his teeth. Before them stood an enormous black bull. Its eyes gleamed in the forest's shadows. Abruptly, the bull bellowed. Sheru, positioned beside the king, asked if they were truly going to hunt these beasts. The boy gave a nervous grin, declaring they'd triumph over them. Stepping forward, he instructed the group to stay low and wait while he scouted ahead. Soon, the protagonist slipped behind a tree. Hidden there, the boy began to weep. He didn't want his people to perish so easily. Observing the bulls before him, he muttered that he could shape the tribe into a unified family. Moments later, a bull lumbered past. Chen Li, lifting his head, thought to himself that this creature was 3 times his size. He needed to find a calf to test his abilities. Still concealed behind the tree, he whispered that the beast looked terrifying. Watching it graze, Chen Li contemplated an attack. Soon, he spotted the smallest bull. He resolved to try reasoning with it first. Emerging from his hiding spot, he greeted the young calf. It froze, grass dangling from its mouth. The protagonist forced a shaky smile. His eyes widened, sensing something amiss. The calf opened its jaws and let out a deafening roar. The sound startled nearby birds and summoned the adult bulls. They charged immediately. The boy spun around and fled. As he swam across the river, he shouted for the bulls to stop their pursuit. The river didn't deter them, and they surged after him. Shiru and his group remarked that he was truly worthy of being their king. Their leader had provoked the entire herd and was now escaping them. Soon the protagonist reached a towering wall. He leaped upward. The boy began to nimbly scale the wall, reaching for the ledge above. Luckily, he grasped it. Chen Li quickly secured it with his other hand. Glancing back, he frowned. The massive bulls slammed into the wall, unable to stop in time. They collapsed, unconscious. Having climbed onto the ledge, the protagonist understood the situation. He chuckled, saying that, if they could, they should try climbing up here. The bulls stirred, glaring angrily at their foe. The boy frowned, noting that this cliff wouldn't support the bulls' weight, so they wouldn't follow. The bulls turned and trudged away. Chen Li, who had observed it all, said that upon returning today he should inform the hunters and arm them. The boy looked upward. He was unsure how to descend now. The enraged bulls waited below. The protagonist began climbing higher to find another route. Soon, his hand reached the cliff's summit. He squinted at the sight before him. A stunning sea and landscape unfolded. Chen Li smiled. Surveying the area, he declared this place far superior. Raising his hand slightly, he announced his intent to establish a tribe, a city, an empire here. He nodded to himself, saying the game was just starting. Xiong peered at the bulls through his makeshift binoculars. Shiru, standing behind him, asked if the king had been trampled. The man scaled a tree, stating he needed to find a way to retrieve the king's axe. His foot brushed against moss. Something darted toward him from behind. The axe embedded itself in the tree, startling Shiru. The protagonist appeared behind him and said he was quite courageous. The boy laughed, noting he didn't think the man wished him dead. The group emerged from their hiding spots. Seeing the king, Shugu, grinning and standing before the boy, asked how it went. If those bulls were mighty, gesturing toward the bull, the hero declared he'd feast on beef to restore his vigor. They ought to give it a try. Xiong lifted his hands, urging them to abandon the notion. The hero squinted, questioning if his words weren't clear. Clenching his jaw, he intimidated his followers, stating they only needed to respond with a yes or no. Out of fear, they quickly consented to his plan. Chen Li, satisfied with their response, seized his axe. Hoisting it, he proclaimed that starting today, he'd instruct them in crafting a formidable weapon. Tightening his grip, he added that he'd also teach them advanced hunting methods. The band of hunters rejoiced at the king's words. Soon, the sun dipped behind the mountains. The hero swung his axe, felling a tree with a single strike. The trunk crashed to the earth. The hunters gaped in astonishment. Shu, grinning, asked why he'd chopped it down, noting the tree was inedible and bore no fruit. Resting the axe on the stump, the hero explained it was material for weapon making. Grasping a stick roughly 2 meters long, he began detailing the process step by step. He sharpened one end, and soon a rudimentary spear took shape in his hands. A system window materialized beside him, granting a bonus to his craftsmanship. Chen Li, chuckling, admitted he didn't understand the purpose of this technology. The hero lifted the spear, explaining it was called a spear, used to stab foes or hurl at them. The hero's brow furrowed. Moments later, he launched the spear, which pierced the tree trunk, splitting it with the impact. Shiru's jaw dropped in awe. Pointing at the spear, the hero declared it a mighty weapon. Seconds later, he embraced his king, and the whole group began to revere him. Shu, elated, raised the spear as the hero announced it now belonged to him. Turning to his followers, the young man instructed them to craft their own spears. The sun blazed brightly over the clearing. Shiru narrowly blocked Huang's strike. Ain, clutching a spear, remarked it was an excellent weapon. Chen Li, raising his hand, challenged the men to attack him. The group exchanged glances before charging at the king together. The king stood composed, awaiting their approach. He nimbly evaded Wolfbone's strike. The young man sidestepped, dodging another opponent's thrust. Chen Li glanced back, swiftly striking a spear into a foe's jaw before landing firmly on his feet. Wolfbone lunged at the king again. The hero, scowling with intensity, met his opponent's gaze. Blood sprayed from a wound. Xiong recoiled at the sight. Shiru and Huang halted the skirmish. The hero's spear paused at Wolfbone's chest, and he declared him defeated. The man, eyeing the spear nervously, collapsed, proclaiming the king godlike and unbeatable. The young hero grinned, noting they lacked skill with wooden weapons and still relied on raw strength. All eyes followed the king's back as he stressed that mastery demanded practice. Now, they'd practice spear throwing. Soon, the hero etched a target on a boulder. Standing in the clearing's center, he directed his men to line up and hurl their spears. Shu swung his spear, eager to throw first. His spear struck the boulder but missed the mark. Shiru scratched his head as the hero noted his throw was strong but needed better aim. Zhong's spear landed in the dirt before the hero. Frowning, the hero scolded that the spear was aimed at him, not the target. Many began launching spears, striving to hit the mark. The hero glanced at them, realizing their lack of natural skill. Suddenly, a spear whizzed past him, striking the target with a crack. Chen Li immediately turned to Ain, who'd thrown it. Smiling, he asked if he wanted another. The hero handed Ain 2 spears, declaring them his. Abruptly, Shanling peeked from behind a tree, warning of a massive beast approaching. The king peered into the distance, commanding everyone to arm themselves and prepare. A colossal shadow loomed before the group. The hero's brow furrowed as he scanned the forest, eager to hone his skills in this moment. Then, a beast erupted from the trees. A massive red boar bellowed as it charged into the clearing, jaws wide, barreling toward the group. The hero brandished his spear, ordering his men to follow his lead. Evading the creature, the lad directed his companions to encircle it. He charged toward the boar. The boar and the youth clashed. The hero's frame was pulled back by the beast's bolt. They hurled their spears, which stabbed into the creature's hide. Tears welled in the boar's eyes. The boar panted heavily. Gazing at its foe, steam puffed from its nostrils. Ajin launched his spear. The boar surged at the man. Observing this, Shiru, Hangsha, and Lutin brandished their spears. They cast their weapons at the beast in unison. It charged at the hero with a shriek. An axe materialized in the lad's grip. Swinging the axe, he gashed the beast's leg. Xion recoiled. He leapt from the tree with a yell. The lad's spear struck the creature's head. It began thrashing in agony. The enraged monster bellowed and rose. Henny fled from the furious beast. Zhong propped himself up with his spear. The hero dashed straight at the boar. He sprang upward. Moments later, Chen Li swung his axe. The axe sliced through the haze. Shu and the hunter stood, shouting to check if the king was unharmed. Soon, a silhouette emerged from the mist. Meanwhile, Shang rested atop the boar's carcass. He rose, brushing away a tear. The lad thanked the king, giving a thumbs up. The youth declared he'd done splendidly. Now he could join all future hunts, and a new weapon would be crafted for him. Ain leapt with glee. Spotting Shaining passing with meat, Shugu requested a piece. Smiling, the girl declined, saying she'd saved it for the king. When Shaining delivered the meat, the youth asked if they truly ate it like that. Dropping her hands, the girl explained they hadn't had time to maintain the fire's source last time. The hero gaped at Shaining in disbelief. The lad stood and announced he knew a solution. He eyed the broken blade. Crouching by the log, he instructed everyone to watch and learn as he demonstrated. He spun the blade rapidly. It whirled at incredible speeds. After a few minutes, the log ignited. Shiru raised his arms, proclaiming he wanted the world to know their king had tamed fire. The men attempted to spark flames near the log. Abruptly, a system window materialized, startling the hero. A panel appeared before the lad. Studying it, he noted he'd earned 10 technology points instantly. Tapping the screen, he admitted he wasn't sure of their purpose. Examining the system panels, he pondered what he could do with the points. The youth looked up, stating cave paintings were how people shared knowledge. He should use technology points to decipher the markings. He shivered when Shang called him. Approaching, the lad said he'd noticed signs the boy was nurturing something. When the king faced him, the youth suggested cubs were nearby. Shang, half turning, said he'd spent much time searching for cubs. Soon the group arrived and saw everyone diligently weaving straw into rope. Shu paused, asking what they were doing. Ain grinned, explaining it was straw rope, far sturdier than vines. A rope soon appeared in his hand. Shu shut his eyes, admitting he was confused. The hero, clutching a branch, told the man to gather everything there. The youth planted the branch in the ground. Forming a rough circle, he summoned everyone to him. Holding a rope, he directed his group to pick a branch like his and a rope. Chen Li, gathering branches, said everyone must craft at least 5 such structures. They inserted the assembled frame into the prepared hole. Finally, they bound them with ropes. They carefully spread straw outside. Thus, a basic pigsty emerged in the clearing. The crowd cheered at the finished hut. They eagerly rushed toward it. The entire group climbed into the pigsty, astonishing the hero. The youth slapped his face, clarifying the pigsty wasn't for them. Soon, Shang and Shanning arrived with piglets. Xiong, lifting the young ones, said they'd brought offspring. The hero, turning to them, praised their work. Pointing at the hut, he said the piglets belonged there. Shu charged at the king. Hugging him, he asked how he could give such a fine den to pigs. Huang embraced the king, saying they could finally shield themselves from wind and sun in this shelter. They all wanted to stay there. Chen Li pushed the group away. Standing behind, he said if they chose the pigsty, he didn't mind. But once a better house was built, there'd be no space for them. Huncha, leaning toward his friend, nervously offered his spot, saying, "Pigs belong there." So Sung guided the piglets into the hut. Ayan, nearing the king, asked why they cared for pigs if they were just food. The hero questioned if the boy would be glad to eat meat daily without hunting. The boy grinned, saying he'd be thrilled. As Shang watched the piglets, Chen Li explained that raising them to produce more piglets ensured a good life. The youth smiled, saying, If they didn't understand, it was fine, they just needed to keep learning. A system panel appeared, signaling the quest's completion. The hero frowned, ordering the system to reveal the reward. A small chest opened. The lad received a salt pouch. Chen Li gawked at the system panel, surprised. His reward was the skill to cook various dishes. He grinned nervously, noting he'd need to master cooking before advancing science and technology. Studying the system window, he resolved to gather diverse ingredients and spices. As night descended, the moon climbed high in the sky. The protagonist rested by the flickering fire. Xiang started when the king summoned him. The boy, gazing at the flames before him, explained that he'd been wounded during the day and had to stand guard at night for the group, so he expressed gratitude for the day's help. Bowing his head, the boy admitted that because of his actions, the king had been captured and nearly lost his life, so he was eager to assist. The protagonist grinned, assuring the boy he held no grudge and wasn't like those who sought vengeance. The boy turned his face and inquired about something else, whether other tribes lived nearby. Xiong, glancing at the king, confirmed there were others, but they were hostile and unlike them in appearance. Chen Li's brow furrowed as he stared into the fire. He pressed for details about who they were, their numbers, and their locations. The boy's lips parted as he revealed that 3 tribes dwelt in the vicinity: the Coconut Grove, the Sea Bay, and the Giant Rock tribes. They lived far apart, requiring at least a day's trek through the forest to reach them. Chen Li's eyes narrowed as he asked for specifics about each tribe. So Xiong began his tale. The Coconut Grove tribe was the nearest, residing to the east with around 30 to 40 members. They avoided conflict, and their leader, a woman, was formidable. The Sea Bay tribe also numbered 30 to 40, appeared fearsome, and frequently fought among themselves. The Giant Rock tribe was the mightiest, with a large population. They typically dwelled in the mountains but occasionally descended. Their leader possessed extraordinary strength, capable of slaying a tiger barehanded. The protagonist stroked his chin, silently noting that the Coconut Grove tribe seemed the easiest to conquer. Addressing the group, he cautioned that despite their peculiarities, they shouldn't be treated harshly, and a peaceful approach to defeating them was necessary. Suddenly, the protagonist stiffened, a chill running through him. Shanling placed her hands on his shoulders, smiling as she asked if he'd like to do something fun with her. The protagonist turned and declined her offer. Chen Li paused, watching Shanling mimic a cat's movements. Complimenting her, he reached for Xiang. Grasping the boy, he dashed off, saying Xiang needed a bathroom break. Tears welled in Shanling's eyes. On a branch, Xiang and the protagonist sat. The boy called to the king, looking downward. The protagonist observed 2 figures on the shore, his expression darkening. A blue humanoid chased a bird, soon catching a dodo. Turning, the protagonist remarked that they'd been watching all night and only now spotted the Sea Bay tribe. The 2 figures laughed, delighted with their catch. One aimed a gun at the other, demanding the dodo or threatening death. From the branch, the protagonist noted their strong limbs but simplistic minds. Frowning, he mused that if they could recruit them, their tribe's numbers would grow, aiding in capturing the dodo. Xiong, lips parting, warned that their tribe was half the size and couldn't fight them. Below, the 2 figures began to brawl. Chen Li, crouching, acknowledged the issue but suggested that with advanced weaponry, their strength could be sufficient. First, they needed to clear out the herd of black bulls, then use new resources to craft stronger weapons and gear to resist enemies. Looking at Xiong, he announced their return. Morning soon arrived, and the camp stirred awake. Shiru froze, eyes widening. The group rejoiced at the king's return. Shiru, tears streaming, said they'd searched for him endlessly, fearing he'd abandoned them. The protagonist smiled, apologizing for causing worry. Raising his hand, he instructed Shiru to train with spears. Turning to Ain, he tasked the boy with teaching throwing skills, giving him just 1 day to improve their abilities. Noticing the tribesmen's enthusiasm, he warned they had little time. Hearing Shanling's voice, the protagonist froze. The girl approached, noting that certain leaves were handy for bathroom use. When the boy thanked her for the tip, but asked her to gather the women to assist with weapon making, she stopped smiling. Raising his hand, he explained they should first collect rocks, and he'd show them how to craft an axe. Shanling, lifting her hand, promised to summon everyone. Soon, 3 girls returned with rocks. The protagonist inspected one, declaring it ideal for sharpening. He placed the rock on a grinder, rubbing it to form an axe tip, then bound it to a stick with rope. An axe soon rested in his hand. The women cheered for the protagonist. Then, the system notified him of his successful creation of a stone tool sharpening technique. Chen Li clenched his fist, frustrated that he earned 10 points for making fire, but only 1 for grinding stone tools. His body shook with anger. Waving his hand, he ordered them to follow his directions. Suddenly Shanling shrieked, claiming she'd already completed everything. The main character was taken aback to find her wielding a double-edged axe and commended her skill. Abruptly, a system interface materialized before the young man. He examined the display, which notified him that he had unlocked a hidden ability to uncover talents. Shifting his attention to Shaning, he realized that crafting tools must also be a talent. The girl, shielding her face with her hands, was puzzled by the king's intense gaze. Chen Li, with a broad grin, instructed the girls to fashion a stone axe to the usual standard. They needed to produce as many weapons as possible today. As the sun dipped below the mountains, the group crafted spears and axes. The young man, standing beside Shan, praised her, noting that she had made over half of all the weapons. She was exceptional. Handing over the 30th spear, the girl inquired if her creation surpassed the older ones. He replied, affirming her talent, stating that all her weapons were superior to the previous ones. Narrowing his eyes, he observed her hands, and remarked that she had been sharpening spears and stones all day, which had left her injured. Shaning, tucking her hair back, said that as long as she could aid the king, she was ready to work tirelessly. O and Shosho approached, mentioning their own wounds, asking if their efforts weren't also valued. Shaning, irritated, watched as these girls neared her king. He turned and fled, saying he needed to check on his training progress. As he moved through the forest, the boy muttered that they all intimidated him. He stopped short when he heard Aiden's scream. A massive log was hurtling toward him. He barely ducked in time, saving himself. Looking at the log, Chen Li commented that the hunters were enjoying themselves. Ayan, approaching the logs, said that Hanger and Langucha had triumphed. Soon the boy saw the king approaching. Standing beside him, the boy noted that everyone had improved greatly today and could now hit moving targets. Turning his head, Ain remarked that Zhao, though powerful, lacked precision in throwing. Only when paired with Shiru could he throw a spear accurately. Though Lutin was quiet, he was the most dedicated, mastering spear throwing first. Surprisingly, Hong and Languchu were unremarkable individually, but as a duo, they launched 4 spears rapidly, hitting the target alternately. The protagonist, looking at Ayan, declared they would face the Black Bulls tomorrow. Picturing the defeated bulls, the young man said he should bring a secret weapon. Ain grinned and asked what kind of weapon it was. Chen Li kept working even as night fell. He hammered on, sweat streaming down his body. Clenching his jaw, the young man struck the stone axe against the cobblestone. Exhaling wearily, the hero murmured that he hadn't slept all night, determined to finish. He recalled Ain's curious expression when he asked about the secret weapon. The king then pointed to the herbs in his hand, urging the others to look. He instructed them to pick off the black-tipped leaves, warning that if they had cuts on their hands, they should avoid the leaves' sap. Examining the plant, the boy reminded himself that the system had identified it as a natural paralytic. He hoped its juice could immobilize the monsters. The fighter looked up when called and learned that spears had been delivered. Shining, surprised, noticed a hollow in the boulder and asked why the king had carved it. As the girl with the bundle of spears approached, he explained it was a stone mortar and its purpose would soon be clear. He then asked her to summon the girls to use the new tool to crush the green leaves and coat the spear tips with the juice. A tribesman approached next, asking how they could assist. Glancing at the others, the boy told them to eat and rest first, as a major battle loomed. Meanwhile, dawn broke. The boy climbed a tree with his breakfast, sprinkling salt on the meat and musing aloud that it tasted far better this way. At that moment, the blonde raised her spear and shouted to the king that all was ready. She threw the spear, and the hero caught it calmly. Looking at his warriors below, the young man ordered the women to stay and protect the children, while the rest should grab their weapons and follow him to the mountain. The tribe cheered enthusiastically. The king lifted his divine weapon, declaring the hunt start. His squad readied for battle, and the commander-in-chief announced that now it was the monster's turn to quake. Clouds obscured the sun. From the cliff, the tribe peered down. Hansa told Chugu that the king had gone alone as bait. Observing the monsters below, he questioned if it was too risky. The boy replied that the king was so formidable, what danger could there be, and urged them to watch. Perched above, Xiong instructed everyone to prepare. Peering cautiously, the hunter noted movement across the river. Shugu turned to the girls, asking them to pass spears promptly, especially to Ain, who must not be left unarmed. With a serious expression, the man stressed that the king had taken a huge risk, and they couldn't afford mistakes. 10 minutes earlier, the black bulls were grazing calmly. The protagonist peered from behind bushes. Watching the enemies tensely, the young man recalled that, based on recent experience, he could safely reach the mountain. One monster leaned toward the water, and the king decided luring a small bull would be safest. With short hops, the fighter drew closer. Frowning, he silently hoped he wouldn't trip, or he'd be done for. He threw several stones at the enemy's head. Cupping his hands like a megaphone, he taunted the monsters with shouts. As the wounded bull charged angrily, 2 others turned toward him. Realizing in dismay that 3 were too many, the hero sprinted from the enraged beasts, muttering about the risk. The monsters uprooted bushes and snapped trees, chasing the hunter. Reaching the plain beneath the mountain, the young man yelled to Sheru to aim at the lead bull. Dodging a strike from the closest enemy, the king urged his team to focus their attack. Huang rallied his comrades, ordering readiness. Wide-eyed, Shugu cautioned them to be careful. Spears rained down after the command. Several weapons pierced the bull, which roared in pain. Chen Li barely clung to a rock outcrop as the enemy neared. Little Ain aimed his spear, shouting that he'd hit the mark, and struck the bull's neck. The beast collapsed with a scream. As the youth gripped the rock, the bull began smashing it. Looking down, the fighter saw trouble. Before the king could fall, Suga seized his hand, assuring him he was secure, but the king ordered the attack to continue without pause. Gritting his teeth, the boy insisted the monsters must be killed. Dangling, the man commanded the assault to persist. As the hero caught his breath, Shu directed everyone to target the bull on the left. Shanlan inquired whether the king was injured, and he reassured them not to be concerned about his condition. Observing the man flailing his arms, the warrior urged him to concentrate on assisting. The system then revealed a knack for commanding troops. As the young man watched his subordinate, he mused that it was no shock that Shugu led with such skill. It appeared he was groomed to be a commander who could handle everything independently. Clenching his jaw, the man informed the king that the bulls appeared menacing. The creatures were indeed stumbling, riddled with spears. Grinning, the hero remarked that he hadn't anticipated the anesthetic would work so swiftly, rendering the prey unable to charge. At that moment, Zhong pressed his hand to his visor and reported that the other bulls had also launched an assault. Sure enough, a group of monsters was charging toward them from the woods. The king furrowed his brow, realizing this had unfolded much quicker than he'd foreseen, likely due to the bellowing. But aloud, he declared there was no cause for alarm. Everything was proceeding as he had planned, and he instructed them to focus on targeting the 3 bulls below, as they couldn't be allowed to flee. As the creatures kept moving, the hero observed that the poison had indeed slowed them, and he commanded the group to ensure none escaped. The warriors continued hurling spears, and the bulls collapsed onto the grass. At that point, Chen Li raised his arm and ordered everyone to halt. Gazing at the foes sprawled below and the herd rushing toward them, Suga remarked that now wasn't the time for sentiment, as they needed to hurry and finish off the bulls before the others arrived. The young man glanced at his subordinates and asked how many spears remained. A blonde woman who approached replied that, counting those held by the hunters, they had 28 left. The king looked up at Xiong and asked how many bulls he'd spotted, and was told there were roughly 20. The young man squinted and explained that this was why they had paused. They had a limited number of spears. Ajun raised his fist, arguing that giving up would waste their efforts, but the protagonist disagreed. Staring at the drooling enemies at the base of the mountain, the young man clarified that this was part of the strategy. He had no intention of pitting such a small group against the herd. The war had just started, and his aim was to take down their leader. As for the other bulls, they would naturally scatter in all directions. The king gazed at his companion earnestly and stated that to draw out the largest bull, they needed bait. That was why these 3 had to remain alive but couldn't be permitted to escape. However, in the original plan, 1 bull was meant to serve as bait to handle 2 additional bulls, and they had already used up many spears. Then the lookout pointed at a massive figure emerging from the forest, urging them to look and asking if that enormous creature wasn't the bull leader. The giant bull inhaled deeply and let out a roar so powerful that the sound reached the group. The rock began to splinter. Peering from behind the edge, Xiong yelled that they needed to be cautious because the enemies were approaching. The monsters charged straight at the mountain, slamming it with their horns. Shielding themselves from flying debris, the tribe members concluded that the opponents had gone mad. The protagonist looked down, puzzled, noticing that their leader wasn't engaging them directly, but was commanding from afar. Then the mountain started to crumble, and the noise initially confused the hunters before they shouted that the stone wall had fractured. Gritting his teeth, the young man ordered everyone to take cover. But the entire mountain was already breaking apart. Shanling rushed to catch the falling king but tumbled herself. The girl collapsed onto the ground. The hero immediately dashed toward her, shouting that she needed to be rescued. The commander and Huang reached the blonde woman. As the young man checked on his comrade's condition, the others began descending as well. The girl looked at the king in surprise when he told her to rest. Propping his friend against a rock, the young man assured her they would keep her safe. Staring intently at the monsters, Wolfbone asked what they should do to fight the enemy. The bulls were advancing on the group. As they debated among themselves that there was no need for sudden moves but to follow the king's orders, the commander raised his axe, realizing this was a ploy by the enemy, and ordered them to scatter. Without taking his eyes off the monsters, the hero thought the situation was dire. It was likely that the leader had seen through his trap. He hadn't expected such high intelligence from the creature. Shiryu extended his hand downward and commanded everyone still there to arm themselves and protect the king. He turned and shouted that no one should act yet, but should focus on taking down the first bull that charged. The bulls kept advancing. The herd rushed at the group with full force. Luton leaped forward and hurled a spear at the nearest monster. Then Chen Li himself charged with an axe ready and struck the enemy in the neck. The king was knocked aside from under the fallen beast. At that moment, two more foes rushed at Hunger. He swung and threw his weapon, but the monster kept advancing, and the man had to grab it by the horns. Wolfbone approached the captured bull from the side. Turning to the others, Shiryu ordered them to prepare for an attack. Spears flew at the downed monster. Afterward, the warriors below turned to the remaining enemies, who didn't keep them waiting long. But then a loud noise behind them made the bulls glance back, and they halted. With panic in his eyes, the protagonist realized the monsters had just been ordered to retreat. Frowning, he mentally noted that it seemed the boss had decided to fight personally after all. Rain began to fall, and the hunters' faces showed frustration. The hero gazed at the towering form of the Bull King. The beast drew in a deep breath, then unleashed a crimson beam from its maw. The young man swore and yelled for his warriors to scatter. The energy struck a boulder, ricocheting back and carving a crater in the rock. The assault left a deep gouge in the earth. Standing up, the king muttered, "What in blazes was that? A sonic blast or the force of a bellow?" The creature instilled terror, sapping the courage of all his fighters. The monster advanced toward the leader, who declared he would draw its focus, ordering the others to seek cover in the northern shadows. A massive hoof shattered the ground near the youth, but he shouted to those still above to hold for his command. Clenching his jaw, the hero proclaimed to the foe that he was now its challenger. Lunging at the brazen beast, the bull let out a fearsome roar. The young man narrowly dodged, swinging his axe into its horns. The impact fractured the ground beneath the king's feet. At one point, the creature managed to hurl the warrior back. Its hoof gouged another pit in the earth. As the commander scrambled to escape, the bull pounced on him. But then the fighter's eyes locked onto the hollow left by the monster, and he resolved to dash there. The youth sprinted forward. In pursuit, the beast crashed its horns into the rock. A thunderous blast echoed, and the tribesmen cried out in fear for their leader. Even Purslane quaked at the spectacle. The bull began clawing at the mountain with its hooves, leaving the people baffled by the chaos. The creature pointed a hoof at the others, and an order rang out to stand firm and ready for combat. Brandishing their spears, the hunters eyed the beast's mighty claws. Huang bowed his head, admitting their weapons would only graze its tough hide. But then an axe soared from the stone, slicing the bull across the face. It shielded its eyes to keep blood from blinding it. Emerging from the crevice, Chen Li thanked the stout man, for it was he who had carved that chasm. Grasping his weapon, the youth noted it had given him a place to hide in a dire moment. Though, to himself, he admitted he'd still sustained grave wounds. The warriors looked at their king with worry. Stepping from the ravine, the commander summoned Shiryu. His jaw dropped when he heard the order to obey without question. Charging at the beast, the youth commanded his men to slay the giant. The others dutifully rushed the enemy. With a war cry, Huang swung his blade at the creature. But then a sharp horn pierced his gut, and he cursed loudly. The bull bellowed, trying to shake the man from its head. When Luton joined the fray, thrusting his spear into the beast's leg, the youth shouted that he'd be crushed. The monster seized the long-haired fighter with its hoof, but then the king charged in at his ally's call. With mighty kicks to the bull's face, the warrior toppled it. The creature groaned in fury and fired another beam, from which the hero barely leapt clear. The ray nearly hit the blonde woman, who shrieked. The young man lunged at the bull, wishing it dead. He hacked at its shoulder, and the beast's energy faltered. The king gritted his teeth, slicing through its thick hide. The axe sank deep. As the commander began to collapse, he shouted that this was their moment, urging Shiru and Ao to act. Turning to those still above, he ordered them to target the wound. Poisoned spears rained down. The bull roared as the weapons struck true. The massive creature staggered and crashed heavily to the ground. Dust clouds billowed into the air. Sharing a glance with his comrade, Wolfbone asked if they'd triumph. The men above had no doubts, raising their fists in joyous victory. The hero approached the fallen bull, ignoring the cheers for his valor. Clenching his jaw, the youth sensed something amiss. Why were the other beasts holding back? As lightning cracked, the bull rose once more. The leader spun around, only managing a curse. A mighty blow from the creature's hoof sent him flying. The next strike scattered the others. Then the bull fixed its gaze on those above, unleashing a beam from its maw toward them. Slumped at the mountain's base, the youth panted, inwardly cursing his recklessness. He rose, staring down at the beast's form. It was yanking the spears from its wound. He hurled a spear directly at Chen Li, its glint mirrored in the young man's eyes. Was this truly the end? Would he perish right there? Suddenly, someone darted past the king. The spear struck Shining square in the chest. The warrior stared in disbelief, then his brow furrowed. The girl lay crumpled on the ground, and he recalled all the kind deeds she'd done. The monstrous figure loomed before the young man. Brandishing an axe, the hero bellowed for the beast to face him. A strange mark began to form on the young man's shoulder, and the system issued a warning about an overwhelming power emerging. Before charging, the king cursed the bull with death, and a brilliant beam of energy tore through both the creature's body and a nearby boulder. The young man's strike cleaved the monster cleanly in two. The beast collapsed, split apart. Glaring darkly at the remaining bulls, the hero challenged the next to step forward. The creatures exchanged bewildered glances. Clenching his fists, the young man roared that they, too, would meet their end. The monsters whimpered in terror and fled. The axe dropped to the earth. The king leaned heavily on its handle, his strength ebbing away. Blood poured from his mouth, his vision blurred, and the system signaled the warrior's life was fading. He saw his people rushing toward him, Luton kneeling beside the girl. The last thing he recalled was Hang urgently pleading with Da to fetch medicine. When his eyes fluttered open, he gazed at the straw ceiling of a hut. A leaned over him, relieved to see the king awake. His head rested in her lap. Frowning, the hero asked if he was really in a pigsty. She gave a wistful smile and assured him it wasn't. After driving off the bulls, they'd relocated to this new land and built this hut just for him. Gently lifting his head, the woman urged him to stay put while she informed the others. But he sat up, asking her to hold off, which made the blonde think he had an order for her. Noticing his unusual wounds, he inquired about Da and Luton. Images of recent events flickered in the woman's mind. She explained that when they found Luan, he was barely alive but recovered swiftly. After waking, he stood guard outside the king's hut. Ditto's injuries were graver, but magic medicine had helped, and with rest, she'd heal. The others were unharmed. Closing his eyes, Chen Li sighed in relief that his people were safe. The blonde added that in 4 days, everyone had returned to normal. The young man leaned close to the woman's face, stunned that so much time had passed. Summoning the system window, he saw only 11 days remained to complete the quest. As he stared, realizing he couldn't afford to rest, the woman thought he was fixated on a single spot. He tried to stand, but pain halted him. The blonde insisted he needed proper rest. Glancing at her, the chief said now wasn't the time for rest and asked for Shu. Frowning, he instructed her to tell Shu only that he'd awakened, nothing more. The woman stood, and the hero promised to explain later. She left the hut to find Shu. Resting his hand on his knee, the young man reflected that he lacked both combat strength and control. If others knew, the task would grow even harder. He summoned a map window, calculating mentally. Thankfully, after scattering the bulls, the tribe had moved here. They needed to erect a fence quickly, later upgrading it to a wooden wall, and designate areas for crops and livestock. Closing his eyes, he heard Shugu enter to talk outside. The man grinned warmly, saying he was thrilled the king was all right. The young man bowed his head, assigning a task to the burly warrior. Touching the hut's wall, the commander leaned closer, urging the king not to worry and to share the details. The warrior pressed his ear to the straw, promising to carry out the orders. After receiving them, Shugu dashed off, vowing to complete the task. Frowning, the chief thought it wasn't enough. This time, he couldn't afford errors in hunting the bulls. They had to clear the territory. Lutin flinched and turned when called, learning he too had a task. The boy stared at the hut in surprise as the hero instructed him to hunt the bull king, retrieve its skull and hide, and ensure nothing was left behind. The king handed him a divine weapon from the tent. Visibly shaken, the long-haired hunter walked away, swearing to fulfill the mission. The blonde peeked inside, urging the chieftain to rest again, but he refused. Staring at the hut's exit, he said he had a task for her too. She parted the hut's flap as he permitted her entry. Once inside, the chief revealed he'd sent the others away to entrust her with a secret mission. The blonde, misunderstanding, shed her clothes, declaring she was ready. He shouted that she'd gotten it wrong and told her to dress. Embarrassed, she complied, staring at the floor as the young man cleared his throat to speak. Looking at her intently, the hero explained he needed her to stage a performance. Surprised, she asked what he meant. Frowning, he clarified that he planned to send someone to negotiate with the Coconut Grove tribe to convince them to join. That was her task. Perplexed, she recalled their larger numbers, doubting they'd agree. Picturing himself with a monster's head, the king said they must display strength, making joining seem like their only option. Looking at the blonde seriously, he chose her for 2 reasons. Their matriarchal society would respond better to a woman, and only she knew of his weakened state. Recalling his hand's condition before he fainted, he thought the explosion had caused severe damage. Though medicine had halted its worsening, something stronger was needed for a cure. The woman, feeling a pang of guilt, agreed with his reasoning. Raising a finger, she asked if she should appear fearsome to intimidate the Coconut Grove tribe. Leaning forward, she assured him she knew what to do, and that he could trust her with it. The pair strolled along the mountain path. Zhang informed O that they were nearing their destination, and, though the Coconut Grove tribe shunned conflict, he believed they shouldn't be underestimated. The girl nodded in agreement, instructing him to guide them calmly while she handled the rest. Yong remarked that the king clearly favored Ao, having crafted exquisite garments for her. A rustle stirred in the nearby bushes. The messengers glanced over. Xiong declared they had arrived. Members of the Coconut Grove tribe were bathing at a waterfall, some playfully splashing and laughing, others loudly proclaiming their disdain for the Joker. All observed that her companion seemed well acquainted with the area. He chuckled in response, directing her gaze. Xiong pointed out a girl with green hair. She was the one they sought, the queen of the Coconut Grove. Ow, surprised, remarked on her beauty. Xiong cautioned that looks could deceive, sharing rumors that she had devoured several suitors. An image flashed in his mind of the queen with blood at the corner of her mouth, clutching a skull. Or questioned if she had truly eaten them. Xiong affirmed the tale, and at that moment, the tribe's guards appeared behind them, looking puzzled. They called out to the newcomers. The sun climbed high over the mountains, shining brilliantly. The guards escorted Ao and Xiong to the queen, announcing that they had captured these spies who called themselves Poop and demanded to see her. The queen observed them in silence. Xiong, indignant, shouted that they were not Poop but ambassadors, a title granted by the king himself. The queen repeated her question. A strange noise echoed, leaving Ao in quiet bewilderment. The queen declared them lacking in grace, ordering the woman to be enslaved, the man to be fed to the fish, and their meat to be prepared for dinner. Xiong groaned in protest, dragged aside, calling to Ao for aid. She replied that she had thought the Coconut Grove queen was discerning, but now saw otherwise, revealing her plan to offer the meat of a mountain ox. The queen halted the guard leading the captive away, allowing her to continue. Clutching a whip, she pointed it at O, demanding clarification about the mountain ox meat. O confirmed a herd of black oxen roamed north of the river. The queen assumed the girl proposed an alliance to hunt the herd. O countered that such a condition would not make the ox a gift and warned against underestimating people. She added that the bulls were not their foes and that the lands by the river had changed hands. The tribesfolk murmured in disbelief, saying they had frightened the bulls and nearly been trampled. The queen rose from her throne, brandishing her whip, and asked Ao if she knew the fate of liars. Ao replied that their tribe's king had slain the largest bull, inviting the queen to see for herself. An advisor urged the queen not to trust them, warning of a trap. Ao pressed, claiming their merciful king could crush the entire tribe. Xiong, though restrained by a stick, agreed, insisting his companion spoke truthfully, that their tribe sought peace and offered a gift with sincere intentions, questioning what doubts could remain. Ao added that if the queen feared to go herself, she could send others to retrieve the meat. The queen, standing tall and waving her whip, warned them against deceit, eyeing the strangers warily. In the forest, something startled the birds, sending them skyward. The strangers led the queen and her tribe members onward. Xiong proudly announced their return. Shu told him to hush and help build a house, noting the king awaited him across the river. Xiong agreed. One of the queen's servants asked what build a house meant, but she gave no reply. Ao declared they had arrived. The king was in a hut, adorned with massive horns atop it. A servant announced to the king that the ambassadors had returned. The queen scrutinized the hut, sensing a powerful, menacing aura emanating from it. She thought the king resembled a massive beast, his eyes glowing red, as he thanked the messenger. The queen and her servants were struck with fear. Shanling, clutching Huang, spied from a distance. Lutin relayed the king's command to hide the wounded from sight and urged the girl to be cautious. She explained she only wanted to see the Coconut Grove Queen. The king cleared his throat, asking the newcomers to confirm they were indeed from the Coconut Grove tribe. A servant inquired about the location of the bull meat they had come to collect. The king responded that it was situated behind the tent, inviting them to take as much as they desired and could carry. The Coconut Grove tribe members were astounded by the bull's immense size, but proceeded to help carve it up. The king's attendants noted that there were additional parts available for them to take. One of the queen's maids grabbed a dagger and thrust it with full force, only for it to lodge in the bull's flesh. A king's servant struggled to suppress his amusement. Another of the queen's servants defended her companion, questioning the servant's laughter and remarking that they were fortunate to be amidst a bullfight. That concluded the exchange. A young boy, offended, challenged her, asking if she wanted to fight and calling her a girl. An object whizzed past from the hut, slicing through the air and embedding itself in the bull's carcass, splitting it apart. The queen's servants were stunned. It was the king's axe. For a moment, everyone stood in bewilderment. The queen inquired about the nature of the weapon, noting that their boning knives paled in comparison. The king ignored the question, but directed his servants to use his axe to assist the neighboring tribe in dividing the meat. Confusion lingered around the axe. One servant began to say that the tribe had provoked them first, but he didn't finish. The king, furious, cut him off, commanding obedience. The servant complied without hesitation. The king reiterated that they had permission to take as much meat as they could carry, emphasizing that his word was final, as per his principles. Addressing them as both barbarians and nobles, the queen asked how they had managed to overcome the herd of bulls. The king replied that his answer hinged on future events, whether mutual understanding or personal experience would prevail. He declared that was all for now, urging them to take the beef and leave. The queen, with a snort, called him an indifferent swine. The king, reflecting, thought his attire was excessive, and without the bull skin bandage, his wound would have bled. A thin trickle of blood ran down the stone by his foot. He cursed, noticing the flow. He assured the queen that her tribe would receive extra stone axes, which, though not as divine as his own, were suitable for cutting meat. The queen declined the offer, stating that axes lacked elegance for her people. She added that they, too, possessed formidable weapons, but chose not to flaunt them. She expressed hope that they wouldn't need to use those weapons against the neighboring tribe and wished them well. Ordering her servants to take their share, she announced their departure. Or noted that if the meat wasn't enough, they could return for more but should hurry, as the tribe planned to share it with others. The queen's group left without response, and O waved, inviting them back. As they crossed a clearing, the queen paused and asked her scouts if everything had been inspected. Shadows emerged from the trees. A servant reported finding the tribe's structures, which she called houses, and speculated that piglets might be inside, having overheard grunting. The queen was surprised they could build such fine homes for pigs. The scout added that the tribe wielded the divine power of fire. The queen was incredulous. The scout continued, confirming they witnessed the tribe conjure fire from nothing to roast beef. The queen was profoundly shocked. The scout hesitated to add more, but the queen urged her to continue. The scout revealed that the king's tribe consisted of only 10 adults, the rest being children and one elder, doubting they could conceal others. Enraged, the queen demanded to know why a thorough search wasn't conducted. The scout explained that the area's trees were felled, forcing them to observe from the forest's cover. Snorting with displeasure, the queen turned to leave with her servants. But she spun back, lashing her scouts with her whip, warning that further excuses would bring harsher punishment than mere lashes. The servants bowed, thanking her for not banishing them. The sun shone brightly over the king's hut. He sighed, examining his hand. Or asked about his wounds, and he replied they were improving, noting that bull's skin aided regeneration and might heal him over time. A sign of eloquence appeared above Ao, who remarked that this was excellent news. The king thought eloquence was a rare gift. Aya teased that he favored her over the Coconut Grove queen, asking if it was true. Blushing, he denied it. Sighing, he remarked that even walls had ears and ordered those hiding to reveal themselves, then returned to help with his wounds. He noted blood on the throne and asked it be cleaned before Luong arrived, barring anyone from approaching. O agreed, then gazed at him fondly, calling him king and winking, saying he was handsome. He coughed, turned away blushing, and said those were all his instructions. Zhong rushed up, exclaiming that the king was remarkable, as the Coconut Grove queen had indeed placed spies around their camp. He asked if they'd completed his task. Zhong confirmed they had seen what was intended and avoided what wasn't. Relieved, the king praised Zhong, who thanked him and said he'd help Shu build houses. The lad fled. All inquired of the king whether he truly believed the Coconut Grove tribe would agree to unite with them. He responded that it was premature to discuss it, as their strategy was only partially formed. He noted that once the tribe approached them again, they could proceed with the next phase of the plan. Chen Li, sprawled on his bed, could only dwell on his exhaustion. A task loomed before him, set to span 11 days. His mission was to aid in constructing a dwelling, forming a tribe, and growing their numbers to 50. He doubted this time frame would even allow him to recuperate. The young man resolved to inspect the storeroom, taking stock of his resources, a basic language guide, a survival manual, and a cookbook. He also possessed a universal map of the region. In his inventory, he found a sack of salt and a single healing potion, sufficient for just one person. Suddenly, a notification popped up, informing him that his battle axe had been upgraded. Confused, the lad didn't grasp what was happening, as his weapon had transformed into a panga axe. The protagonist hadn't noticed when this change occurred, and in his astonishment, he wondered if the axe had become an artifact. He was puzzled, recalling that he'd handed the axe to Lutin that morning. Extending his hand, the protagonist waited for the axe to materialize in his grip. He was stunned. Now, he wielded a legendary weapon, acquired through a blood sacrifice. Chen Li reflected on this. He had spilled blood on the axe, unlocking its potent ability. He recalled the bloodied weapon, struck by the realization that without this act, he might have suffered more than just a scar on his hand. With a sigh, he gazed at the axe, pleasantly surprised, as he hadn't anticipated a weapon could evolve. This led him to ponder whether other weapons held similar hidden abilities or traits. Setting the axe aside, he concluded that activation conditions were unpredictable. Everything hinged on fate, as that one axe had nearly cost him his life. Chen Li returned to his inventory. Only one potion remained, which he decided to reserve for a critical moment. Determined, the lad resolved to carry his axe and vanquish all nearby creatures. Visions of animals he'd need to slay flashed before him. He was resolute in bending all to his will. He recalled the people who had taken the meat, which should have sustained 30 people for 2 days. Sitting on the couch, deep in thought, he mused, "Time is short, so Sheng will need to work diligently." Near the hut stood Lutin, whom the protagonist summoned, instructing him to fetch Sheng for a covert task. Lu Tin agreed without hesitation to fulfill the command. He and Zhang navigated around the settlement to reach the protagonist's hut. As they approached Chun Li's home, Shang addressed the king. Kneeling, he saluted and announced his arrival. Looking at Xiong, the protagonist asked if he recalled the herd of black bulls they had driven off. Kneeling, Sung listened as his king tasked him with locating the bulls and reporting back within 2 days. The young hunter immediately set out to execute the order, turning and sprinting away. The protagonist settled back onto the sofa, reflecting on everyone's contributions over the past days. It dawned on him that he could craft small gifts for everyone during this time. Zhang pressed on with his search. The lad remained in the hut for 2 days, crafting gifts. Exhausted, he noted he had 9 days left to complete his task. Discarding the materials, he decided to rest for the day. He had created a stone spearhead, a bone whistle, and a drinking horn. Earning 3 technology points, he considered the gifts he'd made. He chose to give the bone whistle to Shiru as it would aid him in commanding battles or hunts. Then, he crafted stone spearheads to enhance the spear's lethality or boost victory chances by a few points. The final gift, he decided, would go to Xiong, believing he'd appreciate it. At that moment, Xiong rushed toward Chen Li as a shout rang out in the street, calling the protagonist with good news. The protagonist's spirits lifted. All entered his hut, overjoyed, announcing that their house was complete. Chen Li asked her to show him. Before they left, Ao suggested the king don a cloak, noting his poor health. The lad thanked her. The girl, eager to support her king for his tireless efforts, made him feel a touch embarrassed, and he thanked her again. Leaving the hut, they went to inspect the new house. The girl commanded the crowd to make way, announcing she had brought the king. Wolfbone turned around. Shu, spotting the protagonist, beamed with joy. He explained that they had built the house per Chun Li's instructions. Pointing to the structure, the man showed it off. At last, the king beheld the new hut in the settlement. Shiru was elated. He was curious to know if the king approved, though the king seemed less enthusiastic than the others. Nobody picked up on the man's demeanor, and the group erupted in celebration, thrilled they no longer needed to sleep in caves or scavenge for sticks. They now had a proper home. The other villagers echoed the excitement, declaring the pigsty fit only for swine and proclaiming this new structure as their true dwelling. The king tried to temper their fervor by pointing out their earlier missteps in speech. Shu mentioned they had also crafted a straw door and hauled it over to show the protagonist. The king started inspecting the door. Suddenly, a notification appeared before him, confirming the completion of the task to build a wooden house, earning him 10 technology points. The protagonist was astonished that constructing a house yielded the same points as starting a fire. He reflected on how much the primitive tribe had transformed since his arrival. Looking at his people, he recalled how they once drank blood like beasts, but now their skills and personalities had evolved. He pondered whether the system's influence was behind this change. Recalling Shugu's initial state, the protagonist concluded this was an acceleration of evolution. Observing the jubilant tribe, the king turned to O, instructing her to notify him immediately when the hunter Xiong returned. O didn't dare refuse. Standing beside the girl, the protagonist declared he was departing, ordering the others to keep building houses, as many would soon inhabit them. Abruptly, Xiong's voice rang out, announcing a discovery. The villagers turned to see Xiong leaping with joy, shouting that he had found bulls. Chun Li commended the panting hunter. Placing a hand on Xiong's shoulder, the king commanded him to follow to execute the next phase of the plan. He then addressed Shiru, who was still dancing with glee, assigning her a confidential task. Stepping aside, they sat on the ground before their king. Over the next few minutes, the protagonist outlined the plan to the group and asked if they had any questions. Shu expressed doubt about the plan's success, noting it was incomplete. Confident, Sheng assured he could complete the task when the time came and suggested bringing more men. Chen Li decided it was the perfect moment to distribute gifts. He handed a whistle to Shiru for leadership, and she thanked him warmly. Shiru immediately began whistling a tune. The king turned to Sheng, mentioning a gift awaited him too, but only after the task was done. Now entirely serious, the protagonist addressed the group, reminding them to act swiftly upon receiving the signal. Chen Li bid farewell to his followers, and Ain even waved goodbye. The protagonist, recognizing the challenging times, decided to assign tasks to the injured. He turned to Ao and Luther, first instructing the girl to deliver a message to Shaining and Huang, asking them to prepare a fire in front of the house, but not to light it. Or asked if this was for the guests soon to arrive, receiving a nod in confirmation. In that moment, the protagonist grew solemn and decided to check the bait set out days earlier. Meanwhile, Shu watched as a crowd approached their huts. She was stunned by their number. It was the Coconut Grove tribe. Panicked, she sprinted as fast as she could, ignoring the apples spilling from her basket, realizing trouble was brewing. Shu raced to the protagonist's hut, reporting the arrival of the Coconut Grove people. Inside the king's hut, Ao was tending to his healing wounds, though he still needed rest. Chen Li, lost in thought, savored the comfort of being cared for. He daydreamed about conquering the Coconut Grove tribe, picturing himself reclining on the lap of their queen with Ao nearby. Caught up in their reverie, they missed the knocking and shouts at the door, pleading for entry. Pleased that the plan was working, the protagonist asked Ao to invite them in. The girl stepped out to greet the Coconut Grove queen, complimenting her enhanced beauty since their last encounter. All welcomed her into the royal palace, where Chen Li awaited. The queen recalled their previous meeting, when the dwelling was merely straw and bull hide. Now, a wooden house stood before her. She marveled at how they achieved this. With a smirk, she asked if the king was too afraid to meet her himself. Smiling, the girl replied that this time they'd take more meat to avoid troubling her again. A crowd stood behind the Coconut Grove queen, eager to meet their friendly neighbors. She hoped their numbers didn't intimidate anyone. All laughed, saying the king had already ordered beef prepared for 40 people. Nearly chuckling in her face, the queen noted it seemed there were far more than 40 of them. The leader of the Coconut tribe grew furious, believing that since O cared deeply for her people, she could serve her. However, the girl stood her ground, declaring that she was loyal to the strength of her king. O gestured toward the beef, still resting in its original spot. She cautioned that if they couldn't carry it all, they'd have to consume it there, as per the king's command. With a grin, she added that if cutting the meat was troublesome, the warriors could handle it for them. The Coconut tribe's queen, however, rejected the offer. Turning to her followers with a fierce glare, she demanded to know if this was true, and her intimidated subordinates nodded in agreement. At that moment, a call from the king echoed from the hut, inviting them to enter. The door swung open, and the queen of the Coconut tribe stepped inside. Chen Li, seated on a makeshift throne, welcomed her. She glanced around, surprised by the sight, and asked if this was truly the royal palace. It appeared decent enough. Observing her, the young man noted her curiosity about the construction techniques, sensing an opportunity to draw her in further. With a triumphant expression, he explained that this was merely a temporary palace. Once the true royal palace was complete, his followers would reside there. The queen inquired if subordinates would truly be permitted to live in such a place. With each word from the protagonist, the Coconut Tribe's queen drew closer to him. He continued, describing how his people would soon live in a stone house, far superior to this one. Suddenly, the queen lunged at Chen Li. Stunned, he swore under his breath, caught off guard. She threw her leg over his shoulder, binding him with a liana, and he feared she meant to kill him. The queen of the Coconut Tribe felt invincible, viewing the man before her as weak. She drew a knife, pressing it to his neck, then leaned in close to his face, proclaiming that no one understood men better than she did. She claimed she could make anyone surrender rare items willingly. Moving even closer, she pressed the blade against his cheek and boldly asked how he felt about her overpowering him. But Chen Li, caught in the moment, found it thrilling. Despite the danger, a plan formed in his mind, and he declared that she couldn't force his submission because he had taken precautions. Inwardly, though, he saw his doom. He had no escape, and his unhealed wound left him unlikely to win a duel. Just then, the hut's door opened, and Ao appeared, announcing that the preparations were complete, and the feast could begin. For a brief moment, all three stood frozen in the awkward scene. The queen of the Coconut Tribe quickly released Chen Li. Clearing his throat, the king announced that their discussion was over, and it was time to eat the roast. He rose, asking if the fire was ready, and received confirmation. The queen marveled at how he remained so composed after her threat, wondering if he was truly cautious or simply fearless. Her next thought was that the men in her tribe were weak by comparison. This one was different. They exited the hut together, greeted by a roaring fire, and the Coconut Tribe's women seated around it. The women called out to their queen, raving about the delicious food. Chen Li pulled salt from his belongings and asked Ao to share it with their tribe. Surprised, O called the salt a treasure that enhanced flavors, instructing them to sprinkle it lightly for a better taste. The women expressed their gratitude. The queen called to O, asking what it was, but Ao just chuckled, saying that if she was scared, she didn't have to eat it. The women around her shouted about how much tastier the food had become, leaving the queen disheartened. Watching her begin to eat the roast, Chen Li thought it might benefit Xiong and Shiru later. After tasting it, the queen of the Coconut Tribe savored its deliciousness. Meanwhile, deep in the forest under a high sun, Chen Li's followers were out hunting. Hidden behind bushes, they observed the bulls, and one warrior questioned whether they had more beef than they could eat. He didn't understand why they were hunting bulls, to which Sugu replied that this wasn't about hunting this time. He urged the warrior to follow orders, noting that the bulls were unsuspecting. Spotting smoke in the distance, Xiong announced that the king had sent a signal. Shu used the king's gift, whistling sharply. The followers charged into action, hurling spears with precision. The bulls bellowed in pain and collapsed. Some fled, and Shugu warned Xiong that they were heading his way. Xiong, perched in a tree, reassured Shugu that he'd already spotted the leader running at the front. With a spear in hand, the hunter leaped, striking the bull's leader perfectly. The beast howled in agony. Xiong, sitting atop it, celebrated his success, declaring the bull his. In the vast forest on a sunny day, fearsome creatures thundered through, their loud stomping and eerie cries echoing. Xiong clung tightly to one's back, urging the beast not to fear as it could achieve what was planned. He called it a feeble attempt, noting that even the herd's former leader was mere prey to humans. The beast resisted fiercely, roaring loudly. Through binoculars, Ain saw the animals fall and cursed, noting the herd was moving east. Shiru, concealed in the bushes, confirmed he had already signaled. Observing the wild creatures, Shiru, grasping a whistle, started to produce sharp sounds. As they kept running, the animals caught the piercing whistle and veered toward it. Confused about the situation, Xiong yelled that they were heading the wrong way. He shouted at the beast, blaming it for taking the incorrect path. Amid the beast's thunderous bellow, the hunter attempted to halt the creature and realized he could ride a horse. The beast charged at astonishing speed through the vast forest toward the waterfall, bellowing loudly. A massive fire blazed in the forest's heart. Thanks to it, the people cooked heaps of meat, and the green-haired girl, anxious about her waistline, worried she'd gain weight from the feast, yet the food was too tasty to resist. Those sitting nearby, gorging on meat, demanded more. Chen Li, standing by the fire, gazed into the distance. Watching the forest and soaring birds, a thought sparked in his mind that something was about to happen soon. Positioned near the girls eating meat, he kept pondering. One girl turned to the queen, pointing out a man from the camp sprinting from the forest. Out of breath, this girl shouted for the queen to notice her. Rushing close to the queen seated near the tents, she cried out that danger had struck. Suddenly, she stumbled. With a piercing scream, the subordinate collapsed at the queen's feet. The queen eyed the girl skeptically and asked what caused such frantic panic. Tears streaming, the girl loudly repeated that a mob of men and bulls had stormed their land, causing chaos, and those left at the camp couldn't hold them back. Fury ignited the leader's face. The girls beside the queen moved toward the settlement as she roared that the animals would pay dearly, and the settlers were baffled, having never provoked the bulls. The queen kept glaring with fiery eyes, and the girls, confused about the events, questioned her since things looked grim. Meanwhile, havoc erupted in the forest as the bulls charged through, attacking people, felling trees, and villagers screamed, fleeing from crazed beasts. A massive bull pushed through the underbrush toward two girls perched in trees poised to strike. They were ordered to climb higher and use slingshots to target the bull. With slingshots prepared, the girls began firing stones from the trees. Realizing the slingshots were ineffective against the beast's tough hide, they decided hand-to-hand combat was their only option to save their sisters. Shouting curses at the beast, the girls leaped onto the massive creature from opposite sides. Fighting for the queen, they attacked the boar. But the enormous monster was unfazed by the girls. It flung them in different directions, sending them crashing into separate corners. One girl suddenly hit the ground. The boar, with a savage roar, charged at the girl, who shielded herself with her arm to survive. As the boar reached her, extending its hoof, she braced herself to avoid death. Blood spilled. The stunned sisters stood screaming, unable to believe what happened. The dazed girl beneath the boar glanced back, confused about why the animal halted. The villagers shouted as they saw the queen, who had saved the camp's resident from the beast's deadly paws, preventing her death. The queen yelled at the raging bull that she wouldn't let her people be harmed, and declared herself the animal's greatest foe. Using her lasso, she hurled the bull aside. It crashed to the ground with a thunderous roar. Bellowing fiercely, the bull's eyes glowed red with boundless fury. The bull readied itself to leap, settling into a striking stance. The queen and the bull charged at each other in a fierce attack. Swinging her lasso, the queen slowed her pace. She let out a piercing scream, coming to a complete halt. The girl stumbled and fell, but a pair of hands caught her, saving her from hitting the ground. Coughing up blood, she murmured that she's in pain, still cradled in the man's arms. Looking up, she meets the concerned gaze of a man who asks about her condition, but she, still coughing, insists she's okay. Gently setting the queen on the ground, the man urges her to rest and leave the situation to him and his aides who arrived with him. The stunned girl struggles to comprehend why the herd went wild and ended up here. The man cautions her to stay vigilant. Swearing under his breath, Chen Li declares the immediate danger has passed. Facing the bull, he mutters that they completely overlooked caution. The bull, gearing up to charge with a thunderous bellow, confuses the boy, who wonders why the animal doesn't recognize him and why it isn't intimidated by the cape crafted from the bull king's hide. As the bull prepares to attack, adopting a threatening stance, it suddenly begins to quiver in fear. Chen Li exhales in relief, realizing the bull is terrified of him. Aiming his weapon at the beast, the boy remarks that they've crossed paths again. Chen Li notes that the animals have quickly chosen a new king, though he's nowhere near the old one's stature. The trembling bull lets out a plaintive cry. Still holding his weapon steady, Chen Li declares that since the bulls have come, they might as well stay. The bulls freeze in confusion. Shiru, Ain, Shang, and Hang charge at the bulls with weapons drawn. A clash erupts between the humans and the beasts. The men attack the animals, who in turn try to defend themselves. Shiru and Shong leap onto a massive bull. Balanced on Shugu's hands, Shong prepares to leap. With a loud shout, he vaults onto the bull, landing squarely on its head and gripping its horns to stay atop. Straddling the bull, Shong begins to steer it. Shiru and Huang assault the beast with a torch and a weapon. While Sung rides the animal, Chun Li urges the queen to retreat, but she refuses, insisting the herd hasn't been driven off yet and she must join the fight. The protagonist grabs her hand, pleading with her not to go, but she pulls away, demanding he let her go. He warns that she can't handle these creatures and explains that he brought skilled fighters capable of defeating the monsters, as facing them alone is a death sentence. He suggests sending the injured to him for treatment so they can later return to the battle. He assures her he can provide shelter and food for all, guaranteeing their safety. The protagonist asks the queen to check on the settlement's residents, who are exhausted, wounded, and unable to fight. Nearby, O questions whether the queen would rather watch the girls die needlessly. The frustrated queen remains silent. She orders the people of Coconut Grove to retreat north with the injured. The weary girls, drained from battling the beasts, agree to withdraw. A girl wielding a bone knife shouts for the wounded to move forward, and the residents follow her command. Chen Li tells Aur he's entrusting the queen to her and asks her to lead everyone to the camp for rest, while he stays behind with Shu and the others to hold off the beasts. Aur agrees. She urges them to stay safe and begins retreating with the queen. Meanwhile, the battle between humans and bulls rages on, punctuated by the animals' loud roars. The fight intensifies, with the men wielding weapons skillfully. A villager rallies them to muster their courage and slay all the monsters. Shu turns to her, warning that a group of beasts is closing in, and if the girls are scared, they should retreat with the others. Ignoring him, the settlers charge into battle, leaving an exasperated man behind. Unfazed by this development, Chen Li tells Sugu the girls are incredibly brave, and the men must keep up. Sugu agrees with a hearty shout. Humans and beasts collide with ferocious speed. The battle persists until dusk, when the girls who had gone ahead reach the spot where Shu greets them. She expresses relief and a touch of joy at their return, quickly asking about the king's whereabouts. A somber A explains that the king stayed with Shu, and many injured people arrived with them, needing rest. Shu, pointing to the tents, directs the girls to settle there, as there's ample space. Gratitude flickers in her mind for their endurance and the hastily built shelters. Shu instructs the uninjured to follow her for water and food, to which the girls express thanks and agree to go. Awa leads the queen to a hut, urging her to stay, assuring her safety in this place. The queen nods in agreement. Awa adds that she'll look after the others and asks Her Majesty not to worry. The mournful queen expressed heartfelt gratitude to Awa for her kindness. The young woman gently shut the makeshift door of the queen's temporary dwelling and let out a serene breath. All reflected that, on the whole, things were progressing smoothly. She recalled standing before Chen Li, who was perched on a pile of hay. The boy explained that the core of their strategy was to exert minimal effort to accomplish their objective, to subdue the Coconut Grove tribe. He mentioned that, having just endured a grueling battle, their group could not withstand further strain. Oh let out a soft laugh, her mind briefly noting that, as anticipated, the king's plan was flawless in every aspect, with only a small portion remaining. On the following day, the girls were busy at the temporary encampment. They tended to a fire and tidied the area. A man stood watch, guarding against external threats. Shanling inquired if all had gone well during the night, to which he responded affirmatively, noting that no incidents had occurred. A girl from the settlement observed their exchange. Glancing upward, she thought to herself that the sky was now overcast. A voice called out a greeting from above, startling the girl, who asked why Shanling was there. Shanling explained that their king had invited the queen to the palace, apparently to discuss a matter of significance in person, to which the settler responded with agreement. At the center of the camp stood a large structure crafted from wood and straw. Inside, Chen Li sat upon a throne. His primary task was to aid the primitive people in constructing homes, formally establishing a tribe, and growing the population to 50. He had only 8 days to achieve this. Yet, Chen Li was displeased, as time was running critically short. A knock at the door drew his attention. Turned to the king and announced that she had brought the queen. Upon entering, the queen remarked that she had overheard discussions about uniting the tribes. With a reluctant expression, she stated her agreement but firmly repeated that Chen Li should not dare to hope for it. She warned that the king must not assume he could compel her, exploiting her tribe's momentary vulnerability. Rising from his throne, the protagonist clarified that this was not coercion, but a bargain. He issued the queen an ultimatum, offering to teach the girls how to build homes. Addressing the visitors, he added that he could instruct them in crafting weapons and kindling fires. They stood face to face as the boy proposed that the Coconut Grove tribe join forces with the Chili tribe in exchange. The girl stepped closer to the chief as he requested that the queen accept his protection and authority. Drawing nearer, he cautioned that relying solely on bravery would prove futile in some matters. The alarmed queen continued to heed Chen Li's words, as he reiterated that the Sea tribe's ferocity and the Mountain tribe's strength would merge. But the queen knew more than he let on. Chen Li paused briefly before continuing, likening the queen to a wounded deer, vulnerable to bloodthirsty predators that would follow her trail and slaughter them all. Overwhelmed by these words, the queen commanded him to stop. Turning away, she repeated her plea for him to cease, lost in her thoughts. She declared that the matter was not so simple she could not force her people to accept a stranger's rule. She added that she might agree, but only if a battle took place, and only then could her people be persuaded. Without pausing, she challenged whether Chen Li would accept this condition. With a grin spreading across his face, the boy chuckled and ultimately consented. Outside the house, the queen and Chen Li gathered the villagers to share the announcement. The protagonist began by stating that, since the queen was injured and unable to fight, he would also refrain from combat to ensure fairness. Turning to Shugu, the king declared that he would fight in his stead. Thrilled, the man asked who would face him. A girl, Ayun, stepped forward and accepted the challenge. Shugu gripped his weapon, assuming a fighting stance opposite the girl with pigtails. Smirking, he warned her not to get hurt. She retorted that he spoke too much and advised him to beware of the falcon's peck. Mocking her by shouting that he feared the falcon's peck, he charged at her. Ayun leaped, hurling her small knife toward the man. He noticed the king standing behind him, realizing the girl was attempting to deceive him. Quickly assessing the situation, Shugu reasoned that dodging would cause the knife to strike Chen Li. He deflected the blade with his axe, which shattered against his massive weapon. A second strike hit the protective helmet on Shugu's head. Roaring that it was over and wishing for death, the man lunged at the girl, swinging his axe. Ayun crouched, brandishing her small knife. She outmaneuvered Shugu, leaping up and striking him just below the eye, where his helmet offered no protection. Shugu protested that someone had attacked him, declaring the fight unfair. Holding her knife forward, Ayun pointed it directly at Chen Li's face. She aimed the weapon directly at Chen Li's face. Ayun lunged at the king with a blade. He stood frozen, unable to react to the assault. Ain, perched on the hut's roof, spoke on his behalf. The king stared forward with a grim expression. The queen remained composed and resolute. The girl lay gravely injured, blood gushing from her wound. She collapsed onto her back, unconscious. One of the tribeswomen raised a clenched fist, and the other tribesmen encircled her, accusing the king of luring them into a trap with a deceitful scheme. Neither the king nor the queen responded to their accusations. Both tribes stood poised for battle. The queen's attendants sought permission to eliminate their foes. One of the king's guards shielded the woman with his body. All called out to the king in a plaintive tone, seeking his support. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He cursed, as murder was not part of his intentions, suggesting someone aimed to spark a conflict. It was unclear whether this was the queen's command or an act of defiance. He glanced at her, thinking, if the queen orchestrated this, the only option left is to take her hostage. He pictured himself doing so, but then she ordered her servants to stand down. The queen roared in fury, questioning if they believed they could fool her with such low tactics against their allies. She declared she had no interest in uncovering who was behind the murder plot, but this battle was over. Her servants gazed at her intently. Turning to the king, she said Ayun was the finest warrior of the Coconut Grove tribe, and without her intervention, Ayun would never have compromised her honor. The queen added that she knew the king wielded immense power, including supernatural abilities. Kneeling before him, she pleaded for him to spare her warrior's life, citing her loyalty and courage, promising the Coconut Grove tribe's gratitude. Chen Li regarded her, thinking this wasn't the worst outcome, and relieved to regain control. He noted one final dose of restorative potion remained. Extending his hand to the queen, he vowed to save her servant. She reached out in return, and he added it was because they were allies. The queen expressed her gratitude, and a maid urged him to act quickly, as Ayun was fading. The king decided, for the sake of peace, to overlook this incident. Kneeling beside the warrior, he continued his thought. He'd administer a small penalty by prolonging her recovery. The dose he gave would save her life, but he'd use the rest to heal his own injuries. Ayun stirred awake. The queen and her attendants were astonished. The king instructed them to take her to rest, assuring them she'd recover in a few days. A girl by the warrior's side exclaimed that a miracle had occurred. The entire tribe echoed the word kneeling before the king. He placed a hand on the queen's shoulder and asked if their tribes could now unite. She agreed, her cheeks slightly flushed. He chuckled with delight, and she bowed her head shyly. The king embraced her, stating she could lead her tribe so long as she followed his commands. The queen mentioned one final request. When Chen Li inquired, she proposed he officially become her partner, suggesting a grand ceremony to seal their bond. The king, disbelieving his fortune, asked again. In his mind, he envisioned carrying his bride, exchanging rings at their wedding night, the birth of their daughter, her growing up and marrying, and them aging together until they passed on the same day scenes that deeply moved him. The queen, puzzled by his silence, asked if something was wrong or if he didn't want a marriage ceremony. He hugged her tightly, reassuring her he did, but hoped she'd recover first, giving him time to prepare. She agreed. The king ordered the servants to disperse and tend to the wounded, announcing a marriage ceremony in a few days. The servants complied and scattered. Chen Li received a notification that he had officially formed a tribe and needed to name it. Checking his tribe's details, he was surprised to see 46 members under his command, meaning 4 were unaccounted for. He decided to name the territory first. The new tribe's name was successfully registered, but he needed to expand the population quickly to complete the settlement task. The protagonist resolved to subdue the Sea Bay tribe. Noting his wounds had healed, he considered capturing prisoners, wondering if they'd count toward the tribe's population. Dejectedly, he covered his face with his hand. AA led the queen away, noting the king's odd behavior and assuring her she'd get used to it. She nodded, then overheard 2 Coconut Grove girls talking. One remarked it was strange to see him so joyful, suggesting he'd gone mad. The other agreed, saying he should be somber, as his fate would mirror his previous partner's. The king tensed. The girl continued that at the ceremony, the queen would slice him apart and devour him mercilessly. Chen Li shuddered, picturing it. Imagining the queen seizing him with her teeth, he asked if she truly ate people. The girls smirked wickedly. Chen Li speculated this explained the scarcity of men in their tribe. A massive shadow loomed over him. The boy raised his hand in terror, pleading with the monster not to eat him. When called out, Shanling lowered her head, disappointed. The boy calmed and asked what was wrong. The woman raised her eyebrows, questioning if her friend truly wished to be the queen's partner. The hunter smiled awkwardly, saying he needed to reconsider. The giantess pictured them embracing and mentioned rumors of a ceremony. The king, imagining being devoured, admitted he'd been hasty. Shanling placed her hands on his shoulders, asking if it was true. The protagonist couldn't fathom his bride being a praying mantis. Chen Li concluded he was ill-fated. The girl hoisted him into the air, agreeing. AA touched her belt, asking why her friend fled when she needed to hide the wounded. The woman pushed her aside, saying she wanted to stay with their leader. The boy asked to be left alone and requested his ally tell the wounded to stop hiding and build the camp. The giantess released him. The wild girl said she'd inform the others. Shanling glanced back, urging her leader to think carefully and consider her too. The girl reassured her not to worry and said they had much work ahead. The young man looked away, deciding he needed a chance to discuss breaking the engagement. The next day, a horned rooster perched on a branch. The hunter stretched his arms and yawned widely. Women hauled logs nearby. The king studied the area's map, noting everyone was cooperating, with newcomers already helping build houses. Closing his eyes, he sighed. Chen Li lowered his head, resolved to end the engagement today. People by the haystacks greeted him. The boy asked them to ignore him and assist the others. Raising her hand, a tribeswoman assumed he'd come to see the queen, noting she was north of the river. A girl pointed sideways, asking the guest to follow. The woman gestured toward tribesmen bathing in the river. The wild girl turned to the queen, reporting His Majesty's arrival. The bride asked her to leave them alone. The tribeswoman hurried off. The queen greeted the boy from the river, placing her hands on the bank, and asked if he had urgent business. The boy raised his hand, explaining he'd come to check her wounds. The woman narrowed her eyes, saying she just needed a few days' rest, as her injuries weren't severe. Licking her lips, the queen asked if she should come ashore, assuming her guest wanted to taste something. The hunter raised his hands, insisting it wasn't necessary. Closing his eyes, the king recalled he didn't know her name. The bride smiled, sensing his thoughts, and lowered her ears. Xiaolan touched her cheek and introduced herself. Chen Li frowned, asking her name again. She explained her predecessor gave her the name, but since her exile, no one used it. Covering his head, the boy realized he too could face exile, and decided their tribe should be renamed the Praying Mantises. Insects perched on a tree branch. The young man asked if the previous queen had a partner and what became of him. The woman revealed he was eaten, a tribal tradition believed to grant strength by consuming the groom. The hunter parted his lips in dismay, pondering how she could utter such words with such a serene demeanor. The bride offered a gentle smile and remarked that this custom was outdated. The queen arched her brows and declared that she had no intention of upholding it, deeming it far too crude. The king inquired if she truly did not consume people. Xiaoan grinned broadly and responded that she had yet to find a partner, thus having no chance to devour anyone. The protagonist exhaled in relief, waving his hand. Chen Li urged her to rest and hydrate, mentioning that he would go arrange the ceremony. The boy swiped his forehead with his palm, relieved that he no longer feared being eaten, though Shanling would need to negotiate with her. The girl smirked and added that there was more to the story. The boy tightened his lips nervously. The woman clarified that she wouldn't hesitate to slice off a piece if someone crossed her. The hunter glanced around anxiously. The axe split the carrot cleanly in two as she held it in her hands. Shou commented that the vegetables were slicing well today. The king neared his dwelling when a task emerged before him. The protagonist understood he needed to capture several prisoners and complete it immediately. Shu passed by and greeted him with a good morning. Chen Li glanced at him and mentioned he had a task for him. Frowning, the boy explained he had to step away briefly and asked his comrade to oversee the tribe's work organization, instructing him to find him at the South Sea if an emergency arose. The bright sun blazed over the beach, where fishermen corpses lay scattered on the ground. Perched on a branch, the young man wondered what had transpired. The hunter glanced sideways and realized the Sea Bay tribe had been decimated, with dead monsters strewn across the shore. The king observed them from the tree's height. Birds circled the monsters, one lifting a wing to boast how she had single-handedly defeated them. The protagonist nudged her with a kick and told her to leave. The birds scattered. Chen Li realized even they were asserting dominance, and decided the area was safe for now. The boy placed his hand on a fisherman's wound, noting the battle was recent since the bodies were still warm and odorless. Their hands bore sharp claws. The young man recognized he needed to be cautious, as the wounds resembled scratches from those claws. The hunter withdrew his hand, wondering if a feud had occurred. He rose to his feet, deciding it would be wise to find survivors and bring them to the tribe. The king looked down tensely. On the shore lay a dead monster, unmarked by wounds, its face contorted, suggesting a painful death. The monster rested waist-deep in water, its arm entangled in seaweed. The protagonist pondered whether the water people could drown in the sea. Chen Li crouched and questioned what had truly happened. He turned back upon hearing a scream. Zhang dashed to the shore, and the boy asked what was wrong. The boy raised his hands, reporting that a group of frenzied Seabay tribe members had attacked them. The hunter clenched his teeth, realizing they needed to return immediately. He leapt up and sprinted forward at full speed. Warriors emerged to defend the tribe as fishermen rose from the river. Shu lifted his hand, urging his comrades to conserve energy and prepare for combat. The monsters advanced, unfazed by the spears piercing them. Ain, perched on a branch, asked what had happened to them, noting their apparent immunity to pain. The monsters extended their claws, and the fighters raised their weapons. The man ordered them not to let the enemy drag them into the water, where only death awaited. The fishmen dropped to all fours and charged. The tribesmen hurled projectiles, knocking the monsters down. The hunters joined the fray, seizing the opportunity. A warrior gritted his teeth and reported that the queen had arrived to assist. Xian approached, asking what was happening. Observing the advancing monsters, the girl questioned if they were from the southern shore and remarked on their bizarre state. Sugar glanced back, suggesting they were mad to come from the shore and attack. The fishmen bared their fangs and hissed. The fighters guarding the village entrance resolved to stay vigilant. The monsters charged again, roaring a battle cry. The tribesmen grouped together to fend off the enemy. The monsters lunged, and the battle erupted. The woman bound one opponent and asked if he could speak. The bride frowned, realizing something was amiss since they couldn't communicate. A dust cloud enveloped her. The queen shouted, demanding to know what they were doing. A fishman leapt at her from behind, its pupils narrowed and eyes bloodshot. The monster raised its hand to strike. The protagonist jumped in front of her, shielding his betrothed. Waves of light energy surged around him. Chen Li scowled fiercely, demanding how the enemy dared attack his woman. The young man gritted his teeth angrily, urging her to leave. He parried the enemy's strike, breathing heavily. The monster halted before him. The hunter couldn't fathom how he withstood the blow, given his 3 points of strength. A fishman attacked from behind. The king spun around, eyes wide. The tribesmen swiftly pierced their opponents with spears. Ain frowned sternly, calling the enemies to fight. Lutin narrowed his eyes in contempt, warning them not to harm their leader. Holding an axe, the protagonist praised their fine work. The warriors continued battling the monsters. Chen Li decided to leave it to them, glancing back to ask Shawang for assistance. A monster struck its palm. The youth urged focus. The opponents exchanged fierce glares. The hunter declared he didn't want interruptions until a victor emerged. The battle raged on. The king grasped his axe, expressing regret for what befell their tribe. Frowning, he added that it wasn't their doing and questioned if they had targeted the wrong group for revenge. The brute dodged his strike. The protagonist noticed they had lost the ability to communicate after another attack. The fishman fell, but one quickly rose and turned. Chen Li noted its impressive muscle strength, reaction, sharp claws, and teeth. The young man narrowed his eyes sternly, realizing he was outmatched despite his superior strength. Facing the enemy, he decided against using Pangu's axe's destructive power, reserving it for dire necessity. The monster charged. The hunter knew he couldn't lose focus. The brute sank its teeth into his hand, its wild eyes gleaming. The king's pupils shrank from intense pain. He shook off the enemy, freeing himself. The protagonist swung his axe and stepped back. The fishman clenched a piece of his cloak in its teeth. Chen Li was grateful for his thick bull king skin, which protected him. Teeth marks marred his arm, and he realized the fangs could have torn it off otherwise. The monster stuck out its tongue and growled, a black veil covering its eyes. It spread the webbing between its fingers, a vortex of energy swirling around it. The brute lunged sharply. The young man ducked to evade. The fisherman chewed his cloak. The hunter wondered why its speed and strength had surged, realizing he had narrowly escaped death. He turned, asking why the monster no longer attacked. The monsters retreated to the water. The king was furious that one took part of his cloak. The tribesmen glared at their foe. Several fishmen surrounded Shay. The protagonist questioned their numbers. The injured man held spears. Chen Li frowned, connecting the events. A red haze filled the air. The monsters used the scent of blood to track targets, becoming more savage and driven by instinct. The boy imagined bloodthirsty sharks pursuing a wounded seal. He smeared mud on the wound, planning to exploit this trait. Exyong raised his stick, asking how he could assist. The hunter placed a hand on his shoulder, requesting 3 piglets. The boy scratched his head, asking if they weren't meant for food. The king stepped forward, insisting he follow orders. He looked away, thinking the enemies would pay for making him sacrifice 3 piglets. The protagonist approached Xiaolong, urging the wounded to leave quickly. The tribesmen brought the pigs to the battlefield. Chen Li pointed to the river, ordering the pigs sent there. The frightened animals bolted. The boy waved at Ain in the tree, who swiftly threw spears, pinning the piglets to the sand. The fisherman paused. One blocked the path to the pigs. The monsters in the water turned, baring their teeth and screaming. They charged, ignoring the boy. The fishermen loomed over the wounded animals. The hunter urged his comrades to act. The king frowned sternly, ordering spear tips coated with anesthetic and aimed at vital points. He narrowed his eyes as Ain shouted something was wrong. The monsters clutched their throats, breathing heavily, and collapsed, groaning. The protagonist asked his comrade if he poisoned the piglets. Xiang denied it. Foam spilled from the monsters' mouths. Chen Li spread his arms, warning his comrades not to approach, suspecting a ruse. The boy looked down tensely, questioning the scene. The unconscious fishmen lay on the sand, caged. Xiaowan ordered her subordinates to stay vigilant and punish any prisoners who acted out. She eyed the sleeping monsters, calling them rogues. One lowered its head, sighing heavily. The woman frowned sternly, asking if it had awakened. The brute reached out, pleading for help. The bride glanced back, asking her ally to inform the guests that the prisoners were awake. The sun glowed over the mountains. The boy stepped forward. The queen lowered her eyes. The hunter asked about the situation. The fishmen gripped the bars, begging for water. The king frowned, asking about the large one. Xia Wang replied that he was isolated from the others. The monster trembled, repeating its plea. The protagonist uncorked a water bottle, pouring it over the fishman's head. The creature drank greedily. Chen Li lifted the water pouch and paused pouring it. The man scowled firmly and inquired if the captive comprehended his words. The large prisoner squinted and affirmed that he understood. The young man handed the water pouch to his companion and requested her to watch over the captive. All crouched down, flashed a smile, and after giving the creature a sip, the young woman urged him not to hurry, promising to fetch more water if he depleted it. The woman shut her eyes and cautioned that the river was distant, so he'd need to be patient. Clutching the cage bars, the creature declared that his kin also required water and pleaded for her to provide them a drink. The fierce woman dropped her hands and stated she could assist them, adding that it would be helpful if the fishmen answered a few questions. The captive clenched his jaw, outraged that humans had amassed an army, attacked them, and now sought answers. Or arched her brows in surprise, glancing tensely at her ally. The burly man clarified that he'd heard the mountain tribe was peculiar, but hadn't anticipated such severity. The young woman furrowed her brow and asked if it was truly the mountain tribe that assaulted them. The woman's expression turned sympathetic. The creature questioned if it wasn't them. The wild woman averted her gaze and explained they hailed from the newcomer tribe, with their leader standing behind them. The creature's eyes widened, admitting he'd never heard of them. The fishman bowed his head and suggested the mountain folk might have betrayed them completely. All shut her eyes and retorted that wasn't true at all. Raising her index finger, the young woman elaborated that the Sebe tribe had encroached on their land, and they had no ties with the mountain people. The woman recounted how the creatures had surfaced from the water, noting they'd lost the ability to communicate like beasts, necessitating their temporary confinement. The captive's jaw dropped, declaring this was unthinkable. The brute bared his fangs and asked if he'd forgotten everything. The fierce girl widened her eyes and urged him to share his account of events. Frowning, Echvu introduced himself, explaining they dwelt near the coast. In his recollection, the creatures were fishing. The creature raised a hand, reporting that Chinyu and Huabi were brawling again. The leader smirked, remarking that scuffles among youths build bonds. The fishman struck his comrade's face. A small creature darted to the leader, whining that they'd stolen his bird. Grabbing the child's head, the large man said he needed to learn to fight, explaining that no one would dare take his possessions if he instilled fear. The child pointed aside, stating those weren't his kind, his expression darkening menacingly. Mountain tribe members stood on the shore. The creature turned and demanded why they'd come. A man raised his hand, but the stranger lowered it, commanding his warriors to slay the creatures. The fighters charged toward the water, roaring furiously. The creature gritted his teeth, questioning if the mountain tribe had truly attacked. From the cage, the leader recounted being knocked unconscious and added that he couldn't recall how he ended up there or what befell his tribe. The protagonist rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Chen Li opened his mouth, exhaling heavily. The young man raised a hand, noting he'd recently been in their territory, finding not a single living soul. The brute's jaw dropped in shock when the young man said the sea tribe would have vanished entirely if he hadn't spared them. The captive trembled, furious that he couldn't protect his kin. The fishman lowered his head, and a leaf fell from him. All reached for it, asking what it was. The young woman passed the leaf to her leader, noting she'd never seen such a plant. The hunter took it in hand. The king frowned, activating the system. A green glow lit the leaf. The system identified it as hemp, whose smoke induces hallucinations. The protagonist's eyes widened in disbelief, questioning if this was true. As the sun rose over the mountains, tribe members offered the captives water. Xiaolong frowned, urging them to take their time, passing the water back and forth. Chen Li held the hemp leaves, piecing them together, realizing they'd gathered them from the Sebe tribe's bodies. The young man frowned suspiciously, picturing people worshipping an unknown entity. The hunter recalled Sung saying the mountain tribe's leader wielded divine powers, suspecting their god was a demon. Examining the hemp leaves, the king deduced the creature had driven the sea people to slaughter each other under hallucinations. He scowled furiously, realizing some had discovered they could hide underwater to avoid the toxic fumes, but ultimately perished from exhaustion. The protagonist eyed the captives, concluding the maddened fisherman hadn't invaded by chance. The creatures whispered plans in the cage. Chen Li surmised it was a mountain tribe scheme to pit the amphibians against them until both sides were decimated. The young man imagined a man trying to seize him, deciding the villain aimed to destroy the newcomer tribe. Looking at Hu, the young man realized they couldn't underestimate the mountain people, who'd turned him into a puppet. A red system window appeared before him. Studying the status window, the hunter determined 3 strength points wouldn't suffice and decided to bolster it before true danger arose. The king gazed at the captive, concluding the rookie tribe remained too weak. The fishman lamented not spotting the villain sooner. O approached her ally, warning that the captive was nearing a breakdown. Looking down, the protagonist replied they lacked time to wait for the creature to calm, suggesting a catastrophe loomed. Raising her brows, the young woman realized they meant the mountain tribe and asked if they'd truly orchestrated this attack. Holding the hemp leaves, Chen Li explained the plant enabled the mountain people to control the Sibei tribe. The young man clenched them into a fist, admitting he didn't know when the next assault would come or if the enemies would fight directly. Looking down, the young man noted they had too little information and urged haste to make the captive recall anything. The hunter neared the cage, calling out to him. The leader clenched his teeth angrily. The hunter asked him not to blame himself, attributing everything to the plant's toxic fumes. The king handed him the leaves, asking if they sparked any memories. The fishman sniffed the leaf, then clutched his head, saying he'd smelled it during the fight with those villains. In his memory, toxic smoke engulfed him. The creature explained he only sensed sharp, unpleasant odors then. The protagonist crouched, guessing the enemy used various poisonous plants. He grinned as Chen Li said they needed to discern the herb's functions before acting. The leader raised a hand, requesting to join their war against the mountain people. The fishman smirked, vowing lifelong regret if he didn't avenge these villains. The creatures thrust their hands through the bars, shouting to join the fight. The young man eyed them tensely. The creatures swore to do anything for vengeance. The young man frowned, noting he only needed 4 for the mission. The captive raised a hand, explaining their keen sense of smell could track the toxic herbs. The hunter gave a stern look, expressing concern about their blood sensitivity, warning of dire consequences if control was lost. He opened his mouth wide, asserting they could restrain themselves without inhaling toxic fumes. The protagonist gritted his teeth, noting they couldn't be certain the enemy wouldn't use poisonous smoke again. The leader tensed, lowering his head in agreement. Chen Li raised a hand, acknowledging their thirst for revenge, but stating anger and hatred wouldn't resolve it. The young man's lips downturned, suggesting a plan the captives might dislike. The creature gripped the cage bars, stating his people were all that remained, their lives in his hands. The young man frowned sternly and consented, giving a firm look. The hunter instructed them to follow his plan, splitting into tasks. The king smirked, promising a chance for revenge, asking if they'd agree. The leader grinned broadly, agreeing, his men extending their arms in consent for vengeance. The protagonist glanced at the smiling Ao. Chen Li was about to depart, but the fishman called out. The young man raised his head, summoning his comrades. He lifted a hand, asking his friends to free the captives, now their allies. The hunter saw a task completion message and rejoiced. A status window appeared. The king closed his eyes, noting the population grew by 22, wondering if exceeding the plan warranted more rewards. He raised a hand as the system prompted point distribution. The protagonist selected the strength indicator to boost it. A cunning smile crossed his face,